Chapter 721. Ning Xuema shook her head. No need. I'm fine. She had already overcome a large part of her fear. She couldn't let all her previous efforts go to waste. Diving used to be her strong point. She had to overcome her fear before she could practice again. Yifeng didn't say anything else. He only said, "Okay, I want to practice again." As he spoke, he looked at the shore again. When he brought Ning Xuema out of the water, he vaguely saw a white shadow flash by the shore. However, by the time he finished pacifying Ning Xuema, the white shadow had disappeared without a trace. He didn't know if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The sun was setting in the west and the sky was filled with red clouds. In the bamboo forest, Dizun was still sitting there. The chessboard in front of him was still the same layout. He lowered his eyes slightly. There was a clay stove beside him. The charcoal fire in the stove was blazing, and a pot of water was boiling on the stove. There was a teapot and teacups on the small table next to him. The tea in the teacup was already cold, but he didn't take a sip. He sat there cross-legged with a book on his lap. He also didn't turn a page for a long time. He knew that with Yifeng's help she had finally overcome her fear of water and even dared to dive again. When she emerged from the water after diving for a few minutes, he even heard her laughter as if she had been relieved of a heavy burden. It was very clear, very proud, and very gratifying. He knew that Xuema had finally walked out of that psychological shadow. When he heard that she had finally come ashore, he hesitated for a moment when he saw the maid waiting by the shore. The maid was sent by him earlier. She brought a cloth curtain and the clothes that she should change into. He heard Xuema talking to Yifeng while she was tidying her long hair after changing her clothes. Yifeng also changed into a set of clean clothes. He was carrying a bag on his back. He said goodbye. Ning Xuema also knew that since Yifeng had returned to his human body, he would definitely return to Yan Ziyuan's side. Ning Xuema naturally couldn't say anything about this kind of thing. She only hoped that Yifeng could obtain his own happiness. Yifeng did not say anything. He had always been introverted and would never confide in anyone about his plans. Right now, all he cared about was Yiyu's happiness. Only when she was happy could he truly let go. He had planned to say goodbye to Ning Xuema in the morning and leave, but he didn't expect that Ning Xuema was so afraid of water, so he stayed for another day without hesitation to accompany her out of her psychological trauma. Now that he saw that she had basically recovered, he was relieved. Naturally, he could leave without worry. He had his own obsession, his own protection. Yifeng's journey was very smooth, perhaps due to the ancestors' arrangements. The Sun Moon sect's disciples led him out of Buddha Lotus Mountain and onto his own journey. Ning Xuema also directly sent him to the foot of the mountain. Seeing Yifeng's figure faintly disappearing under the setting sun, she felt slightly disappointed. On the way, Yifeng had asked Xuema what her plans were for the future. She only replied with 2 words, "Become stronger." Only by becoming stronger could she take revenge. Only then could she stand on her own 2 feet. Only then could she not be bullied. Han Shangyue said that she had the fate of being a jinx and seemed to be destined to lead an army. In other words, she also had the physique of Tang Seng, which was very easy to attract disaster. With such a physique, how could she not become stronger? Yifeng gave a rare smile and said that with her current conditions, becoming stronger was very easy. He advised her to seize the opportunity. Ning Xuema was also smart. She naturally understood what Yifeng meant by opportunity. The ancestor. But was this person really someone she could grasp? Chapter 722. What did the ancestor think of her? Or rather, what did he think she was? He didn't say, and she couldn't decide whether to ask or not. Perhaps she should have a good talk with the ancestor? The Sun Moon sect disciple leading the way was a handsome youth. He was as gentle as water, and had an aura about him that made people want to get close to him like a spring breeze. In Ning Xuema's heart, Buddha Lotus Mountain was the location of the world's #1 sect, so it must be heavily guarded and filled with traps. However, she didn't expect this place to be so beautiful. Not only was there beautiful scenery everywhere, there weren't any traps or patrolling guards along the way. Occasionally she would see groups of disciples walking by, chatting and laughing. When they saw the disciple leading the way, they would stop and greet him. They would respectfully call him Martial Uncle Jing, and Ning Xuema's heart stirred. In the small database she had inquired about earlier, the ancestor did indeed have a direct disciple named Yelu Jingyin, who was in charge of the Sun Moon sect's affairs. He could be considered a person who was second only to the ancestor. If Yi Qingwan hadn't been expelled from the sect, she would have to call him senior martial brother. It was rumored that this person was very talented. Not only was he a genius in psychokinesis, he was also very good at planning. After becoming the ancestor's disciple, he cultivated to Earth grade 7 in less than 10 years, shocking the world. He was highly regarded by the ancestor, and was appointed as an elder of the Sun-Moon sect at a young age. He was in charge of the Sun-Moon sect's affairs. These years he had managed the Sun-Moon sect well. On this continent, it could be said that he was a person who could make the earth tremble with a stomp of his foot. Ning Xuema didn't expect that the gentle youth leading the way would be him, and was momentarily surprised. At the same time, her heart stirred. The Sun-Moon sect's rules were actually very strict. A person of Yelu Jing'an's status definitely wouldn't be in charge of leading the way. Now that he was personally leading the way for her, someone must have ordered him to do so. And this person could be said to be at her beck and call. Other than the ancestor, who else could order this person, who could be considered a sect leader, to lower himself to lead the way for her? She couldn't help but look at this Yelu Jing'an a few more times. This person looked extremely young, about 20 years old. She also observed the disciples passing by a few times. Handsome men and beautiful women. The men and women he met on Buddha Lotus Mountain were each more pleasing to the eye than the last. The women were of different shapes and sizes, each with their own unique characteristics. The men were all suave, elegant, cold, and cheerful. Ning Xuema couldn't take it all in. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. No wonder the people of the pugilistic world all said that the Sun-Moon sect was a place where the best of the best gathered. Looking at it now, it really lived up to its reputation. Even the gardeners who were trimming the flowers and trees among the flowers and trees were handsome and imposing. The ancestor was truly blessed. She could see so many handsome men and beautiful women every day. No wonder he was so aloof and looked down on all the women in the world. With so many handsome men and beautiful women around him, he was probably tired of looking at them, right? Then Ning Xuema understood that he treated her differently. But why was he acting this way? She slowly recalled all the times she had met him. It was as if all the times she had met him were not pleasant. She lowered her eyes slightly, her thoughts drifting away like catkins. She carefully analyzed everything that had happened between her and the ancestor. From Yi Feng's words, she was even more certain that the ancestor had helped her escape danger from Yi Qinghuan. Chapter 723. Ning Xuema was indeed saved by the ancestor. He saved her and Yi Feng. Then what about Yi Qinghuan? She was the ancestor's only female disciple. Did he politely ask Yi Qinghuan for her, or did he directly snatch her away? Ning Xuema had no recollection of this. Ning Xuema narrowed her eyes. She didn't expect that she had unintentionally given Yi Qinghuan a chance to meet the ancestor. She didn't know what kind of shocking scene it would be when the master and disciple met. It was a pity that she was unconscious and didn't see that scene. Ning Xuema's fingers slowly clenched in her sleeves. The enmity between her and Yi Qinghuan was set. That woman had caused her to be so miserable. She had never suffered such a big loss in her life. This debt must be repaid with her own hands. She must also let her taste the feeling of being unable to live and unable to die. But she didn't know if the ancestor would intervene at that time. Would he be biased towards his only female disciple? Ning Xuema shook her head. She didn't care anymore. She would think about this later. No matter what, she must take revenge. She wouldn't give anyone face. At most, she would find that woman and have a fair duel regardless of life or death. That way the ancestor wouldn't say anything else. The most important thing for her now was to become stronger. She must become stronger. As the saying goes, 10 years is not too late for a gentleman to take revenge. She hoped that Yi Qinghuan could live a little longer, and not die too early. Master. Another person led a group of disciples over and bowed respectfully to Yelu Jing'an. Ning Xuema glanced at the group of disciples. Her heart moved. The clothes they were wearing were obviously not from the Sun-Moon sect. Moreover, they had all kinds of uniforms. Most of them were around 13 or 14 years old. There was a hint of childishness between their eyebrows, but each of them was full of spirit and energy. Moreover, there was a hint of curiosity and excitement in their expressions. Could it be that these were new disciples? No. Even if new disciples entered the Sun-Moon sect, they would wear the same uniform. Could it be that they just wanted to recruit him? Ning Xuema's guess wasn't wrong. The youth leading the group was Yelu Jing'an's disciple. After he finished bowing with the group of half-grown children, he immediately reported, "Shifu, there are a total of 60 people selected this time. After 10 more days of training, we'll be able to see their true aptitude. Then we can ask Shifu to choose." Yelu Jing'an nodded slightly and let his disciple lead that group of people down. Ning Xuema had vaguely heard that the Sun Moon sect was recruiting new disciples a few days ago. It was not long after she had transmigrated here. At that time she was busy running for her life, so she did not pay attention to this news at all. He didn't expect to run into it today. Her heart moved and she looked at Yelu Jing, and, Yelu? Facing this youth's face, she really couldn't say the word, senior. Thus he asked vaguely, "May I know the criteria for your sect to accept disciples this time?" Yelu Jing, and smiled faintly, Earth grade level 1 aptitude, single attribute, clever and intelligent can enter. He swept his gaze over those who had just passed by. These were selected from the 800 disciples who applied. The lowest aptitude is Earth grade level 1, but their attributes are not bad, so they were selected. However, these people will go through 3 more rounds of elimination. In the end, only 18 people will remain and formally become disciples. They were indeed geniuses among geniuses, the cream of the crop. No wonder the Sun Moon sect could become more and more powerful. All the cream of the crop came here. Who is accepting disciples this time? Ning Xuema was curious. Chapter 724. Ning Xuema had a rough understanding of the people in the Sun Moon sect. Yelu Jing, and answered all her questions. Us brothers will accept all of them. Oh right, this time the ancestor will also accept one. And it's not limited to males or females. When he finished speaking, he gave Ning Xuema a meaningful look. Ning Xuema's eyes flashed with surprise. Didn't the ancestor only accept one disciple every 80 years? It seemed that his last disciple was Ji Yunwang's master, and it was only 50 years. Why did he make an exception now? And it's not limited to males or females. If he really accepted a female disciple, then Yi Qinghuan wouldn't be his only female disciple. This would be an extremely heavy blow to that woman. Ning Xuema's lips curved slightly. The depression in her heart seemed to lessen a little. When she read the master-disciple novel and saw that her master wanted to accept another female disciple, she felt distressed for the female lead. But for Yi Qinghuan she only felt good. Yelu Jing, and glanced at her and suddenly said, "Miss Ning, do you want to be apprenticed? Maybe you can give it a try." Ning Xuema was stunned for a moment, but her heart was moved again. Being apprenticed to the ancestor was indeed the fastest way to improve one's skills. But with her status, it would be awkward to be apprenticed to him. He definitely wouldn't accept her. Ning Xuema shook her head and smiled. "My psychokinesis is now human rank 5. I'm afraid it's not up to your standards, so I don't want it." Yelu Jing, and glanced at her again and smiled. "Miss Ning doesn't need to belittle yourself. The Sun Moon sect doesn't only look at psychokinesis, they also look at other talents. Especially the ancestors' disciples, they don't stick to one pattern. If Miss Ning is interested, you can give it a try. What if you're chosen?" Ning Xuema pondered for a moment. "I'll think about it." She felt that there was something fishy about this, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Yelu Jing, and smiled warmly and didn't say anything else. She led her back to Heavenly Sound Peak. "Miss Ning must be tired after a day. Go back and rest early." Ning Xuema paused. She was still traumatized by the water wall enchantment on the Tianin Peak. Moreover, if she were to stay here to learn, shouldn't she be staying with the new disciples? He even wanted her to go to the Tianin Peak? "Elder Yelu, I think it would be more appropriate to give me another residence. Heavenly Sound Peak is where the ancestor lives alone. I heard that only his direct disciples can go there. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for me to go there." Yelu Jing An's footsteps didn't stop. "Lady Ning is overthinking. You are different from others. The ancestor has specially ordered you to stay on the Heavenly Sound Peak for the time being, until your name is confirmed." While they were speaking, they had already arrived at the foot of the Tianin Peak. The waterfall was still splashing around like a tidal wave. Yelu Jing, and raised her hand and took out a bamboo umbrella. She handed it to Ning Xuema. "The water enchantment here has been removed. Miss Ning can use the umbrella to enter and exit from here." Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Was the water enchantment removed for her? Wasn't the ancestor afraid that other people would enter the place where he lived alone? She took the umbrella and jumped towards the waterfall with Yelu Jing, and the water enchantment really disappeared. The waterfall was just like the legendary waterfall in front of the water curtain cave. After she jumped in, she directly entered a cave. Following the bluestone steps of the cave, she walked up hundreds of steps. Her eyes lit up as she finally saw the familiar scenery. Yelu Jing, and led Ning Xuema to the side hall where she first woke up. Chapter 725. Yelu Jing and stopped and said, "Miss Ning, you should rest here. If you need anything, you can directly send me a message." He then handed Ning Xuema a light green sound-transmitting talisman and taught her how to use it. The method was a bit complicated, but Ning Xuema was very smart. She learned such a complicated method after seeing it once and quickly became proficient in it. Yelu Jing and looked at her with surprise, as if he didn't expect her to learn so quickly. Looking at her, his eyes flashed with a touch of deep thought, but he didn't say anything. He was about to say goodbye when Ning Xuema suddenly said, "Do the ancestors' disciples all live in this hall for a while?" The hall she was referring to was the one they were going to live in now, and it was also the only side hall on this peak. Yi Qingwan had also cloned a smaller one. Yi Qingwan was so fond of this side hall that she didn't hesitate to clone one for her. Presumably she had lived in this hall and left a good impression, so even if she was expelled from the sect, she was still reluctant to leave this place. Yelu Jing and shook his head. "No, even if we become the ancestors' disciples, we will still live at the bottom of the peak. When the ancestor teaches martial arts, we will come up." He glanced at the side hall. "Miss is the first to live in this place." Yelu Jing and turned around and left, leaving such a bomb for Ning Xuema to digest for a moment. She shook her head, not willing to think too deeply, and walked into the side hall. She was really tired and needed a good sleep. As for the ancestor, Xuema hadn't seen him since she came up, so she didn't know if he was in the main hall. Since she was living in his territory, it was reasonable to go and greet him. Ning Xuema was a person of action, so she immediately went to the main hall to look for him. There weren't many buildings on Heavenly Sound Peak. After an hour, Ning Xuema had already searched the entire Heavenly Sound Peak, but she didn't see the ancestor's figure. Since she couldn't find him, Ning Xuema gave up on searching and returned to the side hall to rest. Ning Xuema had a habit of checking the place she slept in before she could feel at ease. It was like an obsessive-compulsive disorder that could not be changed. Therefore she was no exception here. She secretly checked the inside and outside of the hall, and only felt relieved after confirming that there was nothing out of the ordinary. She actually found a book on a wooden shelf in the hall. The book was thread-bound, and on the cover of the book were a few large flamboyant words. Jade Firmament Wisdom Technique. The handwriting went straight through the back of the paper. It was extremely beautiful. Every word seemed to be able to fly out of the paper. Although Ning Xuema had never seen this handwriting before, she felt it vaguely familiar. No one else had lived in this place before, so it shouldn't have been left behind by the previous occupant. Then did this book belong to the ancestor? A person like him shouldn't have the habit of casually throwing books, right? So this book was obviously placed here for her to read? Ning Xuema didn't stand on ceremony. She flipped through a few pages and her heart pounded wildly. What was written on the book was the cultivation method of the wood and fire dual element technique. Moreover, the explanation was simple and easy to understand. After reading a few pages, Ning Xuema felt as if she was suddenly enlightened. After she came to this world, because of her identity, she had been on the run and didn't join any sect. Therefore, the cultivation books she got were all unofficial versions. Not only was the writing obscure and difficult to understand, but there were also many contradictions. Chapter 726. To put it simply, the cultivation books that Ning Xuema got were like those sold on the streets, those martial arts manuals that cost a few yuan each. They looked mysterious but didn't have much practical value. But now, this book was extremely orthodox and very suitable for Ning Xuema's physique to cultivate. It was as if it was specially written for her. It made her feel like she had found a treasure. She wanted to become strong so much. She had been struggling to find a way, but this book had opened a golden door for her on the path of cultivation. It made her see hope. What made her even more surprised was that although this book looked thin, it was like opening a treasure bowl after opening it. It was inexhaustible, and there was no end to flipping through it. Ning Xuema didn't delay and immediately started cultivating according to what was written in the book. 5 days she tempered without sleep or food for 5 days. In these 5 days she was 100 times more diligent than the sprinting before the college entrance exam. Every day she was cultivating, and cultivating. When she was really tired to the extreme, she fell asleep on the bed and rested for 2 to 4 hours before climbing up to continue cultivating. Out of the 24 hours in a day, she would spend 20 hours in cultivation. Even when she occasionally dreamed, she would dream about the contents of that book. In these 5 days, Di Zun didn't come to see her, but that Yelu Jing and came many times. In the beginning, every time he came, it was to deliver food to Ning Xuema. Every meal was different, and the color, smell and taste were all excellent. But Ning Xuema was now wholeheartedly focused on cultivating. Even when the food was placed on her table, she often forgot to eat. When Yelu Jing and started delivering food to her, he was afraid to disturb her, so he only put the food on the table, thinking that she would naturally eat after she finished cultivating. Later he found that it didn't work. The food he delivered was left cold on the table, untouched. Yelu Jing and had long seen through her cultivation. It hadn't reached the level where she couldn't eat. She always forgot that eating was bad for her body. So for the next few days after he sent her in, he would stand in the same spot and wait for her to finish her cultivation before immediately calling her to eat. He would only leave when he saw her walk to the table and start eating. What he didn't expect was that although Ning Xuema ate, she would often eat 3 to 5 mouthfuls before she hurriedly went back to practicing martial arts. She still didn't touch much of the food. She was too eager to become stronger. This kind of training was simply like going crazy. It was as if he didn't want his life anymore. Her skills had indeed improved a lot, but she had also lost a lot of weight. Fortunately, the ancestor had left her with an extremely orthodox cultivation method, which had the effect of nourishing blood and qi. Otherwise, with her current cultivation method, she was afraid that she would have suffered from qi deviation. At first, Yelu Jing and would come 3 times a day. Each time she would leave after delivering food. Later on he came 8 times a day. Not only did he bring her food, but he also watched her eat and secretly watched her practice, in case she did not practice properly and went crazy. He came more and more frequently and stayed longer and longer. In the end, he almost always came with documents. Ning Xuema was cultivating in the hall while he was reading documents under a tree outside the hall. In order to let her calm down and eat, he also had to find opportunities to talk with her. He would intentionally or unintentionally ask her if there was anything she didn't understand. Right now, Ning Xuema's mind was filled with matters related to cultivation. Even if the secret manual was easy to understand in the process of cultivation, she would still have all kinds of questions. Naturally, she would ask Yelu Jing for guidance. In the process of asking for guidance, she was pleasantly surprised to find that Yelu Jing and also cultivated with attribute techniques and knew a lot more. Chapter 727. Yelu Jing and was also a qualified master. His explanations were simple and easy to understand, which often made Ning Xuema feel enlightened. His work was dependable, his temperament was gentle, and he was neither impatient nor impatient. Moreover, he was very meticulous. Sometimes, when Ning Xuema encountered a difficult problem, before she could even open her mouth to ask, he would already explain it to her according to her symptoms. This allowed her to avoid taking unnecessary detours. This Yelu Jing and was simply a hard-to-come-by good master. What was even harder to come by was that he cultivated the same type of technique as her. Ning Xuema benefited a lot, but once she couldn't help but ask, "Elder Yelu, what are the conditions for accepting a disciple? Do you accept a female disciple?" Yelu Jing and paused for a moment, smiled and changed the topic. If he were to accept a disciple, naturally it would be someone like Ning Xuema. Although her innate talent wasn't the highest, she was smart, hardworking, and could understand everything with just a hint. Others could draw inferences, but she could draw inferences. Every time he exchanged techniques with Xuema, he would be shocked by her sharp mind. This kind of disciple was something everyone would fight over. But even if he liked her, he didn't dare to accept her, otherwise his master would slap him to death. Sometimes Yelu Jing and felt that Ning Xuema was too tired, so he suggested that she go out for a stroll. In order to attract her, he even talked about some wonderful scenery on Buddha Lotus Mountain. But Ning Xuema's desire to become strong was too strong, so she didn't want to waste a second. Other than occasionally chatting with Yelu Jing and during meals, she didn't have the slightest intention of going out. It was a feeling that even 9 oxen couldn't pull her out. This made Yelu Jing and frown. He was really afraid that if this continued, Ning Xuema would directly collapse from exhaustion. Her desire to quickly become strong had already become a kind of obsession. In these 5 days the ancestor didn't appear once. Although this was his territory, there was no trace of him. Ning Xuema would occasionally be puzzled, but she also knew that the ancestor always appeared and disappeared like a ghost. Even his most trusted disciple might not know his whereabouts, so Ning Xuema didn't care about his sudden disappearance. Adding on to the fact that she was fully focused on cultivating, she even forgot to greet him. In the 1,000-year ice cave on the 1,000-year chilled jade bed, the ancestor sat quietly with his eyes closed. He wore a set of extremely simple white robes. His hands were placed on his knees, and a faint white light was slowly revolving around them. The white jade mask on his face had also been removed, revealing his celestial features. He sat there motionless like an ice sculpture. He didn't know how long he had been like this. His body trembled slightly, and his face paled as he opened his eyes. He couldn't calm his heart. He actually couldn't calm his heart. For thousands of years, his heart was as calm as still water. Every time he entered a meditative state, he would instantly enter the highest realm of cultivation, forgetting himself and others. When he went into seclusion, he could stay in seclusion for half a year, and he would not move or wake up for half a year. But not this time. Ever since Ning Xuemo ran away from the marriage and he began to search for her, he had encountered all kinds of unexpected situations. In order to find her, he had no choice but to use a few forbidden techniques and expend a lot of his psyche. In order to remove the disguise technique for her, he once again resisted his exhaustion and used the technique for her. In the process, because he overestimated his ability to control her, he injured himself when he withdrew his palm. After removing the disguise technique for Xuema, he was also exhausted to the extreme. He almost didn't even have the strength to carry her back to her room. In order to heal her pair of legs, he flipped through medical books for an entire night. Early the next morning, he went to the demon realm to get some strange herbs. Chapter 728. Although the process was difficult, fortunately it was more daunting than dangerous. On the surface, the ancestor seemed to have left in a fit of anger, as if he no longer cared about her, but in his heart, she was constantly on his mind, fearing that she would cause more trouble. He didn't have time to rest and rushed back. When he came back, he found that her soul was missing. In order to find her soul, he used a lot of psychokinesis. It was not easy for him to find her. Once again, he used his overused psychokinesis to straighten out her soul. After this series of incidents, he was almost at the end of his rope. According to Rongyue Tianlan, he had to cultivate in seclusion for 15 days to recover. But he was always worried about Ning Xuema. He always felt guilty and wanted to see her. It was the first time he felt this kind of longing for a person, caring about a person, worrying about personal gains and losses. It was the first time he experienced it. His heart always seemed to be undulating. This situation made it difficult for the ancestor to cultivate in seclusion. He also didn't want to cultivate in seclusion because of his own ability. It wasn't until Xuema played with Yi Fengshui in the celestial lake that she slowly overcame her fear of water, that he waited for her in the bamboo forest for an entire day, that he finally couldn't hold on any longer. When he spat out a mouthful of blood, he knew that he had to go into seclusion. If he didn't cultivate in seclusion, it would be a permanent injury. It would be very difficult to recover. He could only choose to cultivate in seclusion. But after all, he was worried about Ning Xuema, so he sent his most capable disciple, Yelu Jing, in to stay by her side. Yelu Jing was a very careful person. He was very reliable. He always did things according to the ancestors' orders. It was reasonable to say that he should be relieved after making such a careful arrangement. But for some reason he still couldn't calm down. He meditated for at least 2 days and 2 nights without talking or moving. But this time he couldn't sit for a day before he opened his eyes uneasily. The first thing he did when he opened his eyes was to contact Yelu Jing and ask about Ning Xuema's situation. Although he didn't see Ning Xuema in these 5 days, he knew her situation like the back of his hand. The more he understood, the harder it was for him to calm down. It was true that the girl wanted to become stronger, but he didn't expect her to work so hard. This mental cultivation method of his was particular about progressing step by step, steadily and surely, avoiding impatience. If she continued to work hard like this, he was afraid that she would cultivate an inner demon. He had told Yelu Jing to explain the situation to Ning Xuema, but it didn't seem to have much effect. Because he was thinking about this, he became even more restless while cultivating. This time, he didn't even spend half a day in seclusion before he woke up again. Yelu Jing didn't know that the ancestor was actually in seclusion and thought that he was traveling outside, so every time she reported to him, she was very detailed and clear. This was exactly what he wanted. After waking up this time, the first thing he did was contact Yelu Jing. This time, Yelu Jing was a bit hesitant when she received it. Her first sentence was, "Master, she's showing signs of qi deviation. Disciple has just helped her recuperate. There are no other accidents. She's still practicing now." The ancestor's fingers tightened. "Let her rest." Yelu Jing's voice was a bit awkward. "Master, she looks like she listens to disciple's words, but after disciple leaves she'll practice as soon as she wakes up. It wasn't suitable for a man like him to guard here at night." The ancestor frowned. This was a sign that she had entered an inner demon. He simply ordered, "Hit her sleeping acupoint." Although this method was simple and crude, it was effective on her. Chapter 729. A moment later, Yelu Jing'an's voice came from the sound-transmitting talisman. Master, she is already sleeping. She can sleep for about 10 hours and will wake up tomorrow morning. Yelu Jing, and actually had a headache. This time it was solved, but what should he do in the future? After she wakes up, he was afraid that she would still cultivate day and night. How could he hit her sleep acupuncture point again and again? He looked at Ning Xuema's sleeping face and was somewhat lost in thought. What exactly did this girl go through to have such a strong obsession with martial arts? He had never seen a girl who cultivated so crazily. When the obsession was too strong, it would become a heart demon, and this heart demon must be treated with care and medicine. He turned around and walked out, sitting in front of the stone table outside the hall for the entire night. Although he didn't know the relationship between the ancestor and this girl, he knew that she was someone the ancestor cared about greatly. He definitely couldn't let anything happen to her in his hands. Perhaps he could only spend the night with her. Ning Xuema didn't sleep well that night. She had countless strange and messy dreams. In her dreams, there were horses and spears, blood flowed like a river, and many people and things appeared. But when she woke up, she couldn't remember the scenes in her dreams. She slept for 8 hours. According to the modern calculation, it was 8 hours. After being forced to rest for a while, her spirit recovered a lot. Just as she was about to cultivate again, she suddenly heard a melodious flute sound. The flute sound was very peaceful, like a flower slowly blooming in the spring breeze. It had the power to calm people's hearts, calming Ning Xuema's restless heart from cultivating. To Ning Xuema, this flute sound was like a lullaby she heard in her dreams. It was familiar and intimate. She didn't know why, but when she heard this flute sound like spring flowers and autumn moons, her eyes inexplicably turned sour. She had the urge to cry. She took a deep breath and naturally understood who was playing this flute sound. The ancestor. He had disappeared for 5 days and now he had finally returned. Then she should go see him. After all, he had saved her life, bestowed her the book, and took her in. She jumped off the bed and was about to run out the door. Occasionally she lowered her head and saw her wrinkled clothes. She was startled. How did he become so sloppy? These few days she was a bit obsessed with cultivating. Her meals were all eaten under Yelu Jing'an's coercion. As for washing up, she seemed to have only washed up 2 days ago. What have I become? Fortunately, there was a dressing mirror in the room. She looked at herself in the mirror and her body swayed. Was the crazy woman in the mirror her? Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was messy, her face was pale, and there was a suspicious drool stain on her cheeks. Her originally clear eyes were bloodshot. Ning Xuema almost facepalmed. She was someone who loved to look pretty. Even though she wasn't a clean freak, she still liked to dress herself up beautifully. She couldn't bear to see others being sloppy. She never thought that there would be a day when she would act like a crazy woman. Not to mention the ancestor, even she herself couldn't accept such an image. She wanted to die whenever she thought about how she was going to talk to that handsome elder Yelu Jing, and about spells in this form. No wonder when she faintly had the intention to become his disciple, that handsome guy would change the topic. Even she herself disliked her dirty appearance. She opened the door and came out. At this time Yelu Jing and had already left. The courtyard was quiet and there was no one around. Chapter 730. Ning Xuema fetched some water for herself and prepared to take a bath and clean herself up. Although she was always quick with her work, she was too sloppy this time. She had to wash twice to completely clean the dirt on her body. By the time she was done, it was already half an hour later. The sound of the flute was long and didn't stop. Ning Xuema looked into the mirror and found that she looked pretty good. Although her eyes were still a little red, it was good that she looked presentable. She then ran out. She listened in the courtyard and found that the sound of the flute was still coming from the vicinity of the White Tower. It seemed that the ancestor liked to play the flute there to attract phoenixes. She hoped that she wouldn't disturb his mood if she ran over. Ning Xuema's guess was correct. The ancestor was indeed near the White Tower. He sat lazily on top of it, his black hair scattered around his body like a curtain. He wore a white robe with dark silver patterns, and the white jade mask on his face shone slightly under the sunlight. White tower, white robe, green jade flute. Against the sea of clouds behind him, this scene was as beautiful as the inked mountains and rivers written by an immortal. It was almost impossible to move one's eyes away from it. He lowered his eyes and played the flute. This time he attracted even more beasts and birds. Not only were there on the bamboo shoots and on the mountain peaks, but even in the sky above his head, there were a few colorful birds with long tails, spreading their wings and dancing to the flute. Ning Xuema stood at the edge of the cliff and looked at him without saying anything. First, she couldn't disturb him. Second, his flute was indeed as warm as the spring breeze. It could calm all restless emotions. The cold wind was howling here, but listening to his flute made her feel like bathing in the spring breeze. She almost wanted to sit down and meditate. The flute finally stopped. The ancestor looked at her without any emotion in his eyes. The first thing he said was, "How's your cultivation?" Ning Xuema also remembered her mission. She cupped her hands and saluted him. Many thanks to the ancestor for the book. Xuema benefited a lot. When she first came, she was at the 5th level of the human realm. In just 5 days she had broken through 2 levels and was now at the 7th level of the human realm. This kind of leveling speed was almost legendary, but it was still not enough. Among the newly qualified disciples, the lowest was Earth Stage Level 1. She would need to break through 3 levels in order to catch up to the lowest level. This kind of gap was simply despairing. Fortunately, Ning Xuema had the spirit of never giving up. In her dictionary there was no such thing as being inferior to others. If she went back, she would continue to cultivate. She might be able to reach Earth Stage Level 1 in 5 days. Haste makes waste. The ancestor's gaze fell on her. "Haven't you heard of this sentence?" Ning Xuema paused. Of course she had heard of this saying before, but her sense of urgency was so strong that she almost couldn't control herself. "Thank you, Dizun, for your advice. Xuema will remember and pay attention to it." Ning Xuema also knew that Dizun was doing this for her own good, so she sincerely thanked him. Dizun tightened his grip on the jade flute. Did she not know how to say anything other than thanking him? "Come here." Dizun looked at her and said again. Ning Xuema raised her head and looked at the white tower. It was about 7 floors high and occupied the entire opposite mountain peak. It was surrounded by empty air and was connected by only a small finger-thick iron chain. The mountain wind here was not small, blowing the thin chain like a swing. Under the white tower, the sea of clouds was steaming. It was impossible to see what was under the sea of clouds, but it was most likely a cliff. Chapter 731. If Ning Xuema wanted to jump to the top of the tower, she would have to run to the center of the thin chain and then use the force to fly up. The white tower was straight up and down, looking like it was directly frozen out of white ice. At first glance, it was obvious that it would be slippery. Once she stepped on air, she would directly fall down. Since she came to this world, she didn't know how many times she had jumped off cliffs. There was already a shadow in her heart, and when she saw a cliff, she would instinctively resist. Moreover, the top of the tower was so small that it felt like it was on the verge of collapse. If she went up, she might not even be able to find a place to stand. "Dizun, if you have something to say, just say it." "Xuema won't go over." Ning Xuema declined. "Don't you want to become stronger?" The Dizun bowed his head and asked. "Of course." Ning Xuema answered without hesitation this time. She wanted to become stronger too much. "Then come over." "Okay." Ning Xuema raised her eyes to look at the Dizun on the top of the tower. His white robe fluttered as he stood there, like a god who was aloof from the world. This kind of person shouldn't be willing to see her in real danger, right? Then she would give it a try. She took a light breath and with a leap she landed on the thin chain. The tip of her foot touched the chain, wanting to take advantage of the momentum to jump up. Unexpectedly, just as the tip of her foot touched the chain, it suddenly sank down. Ning Xuema didn't feel like she was stepping on the chain. Instead, she felt like she was stepping into a swamp. It was as if 2 small hands had reached out from the swamp and were desperately clasping her feet. Not only did she not jump up, her body suddenly swayed, and in a split second the sky and earth spun around her and she fell straight down. Fuck, this thin chain wasn't the way to the other side, it was a trap. Ning Xuema was shocked. She hurriedly exerted strength on her feet, flipped her body upside down and grabbed the thin chain with both hands. Her fingers clearly touched the thin iron chain, but she didn't expect that the iron chain would turn into an illusion in an instant. She grabbed it as if she was grabbing a handful of fine powder. She watched as the thin iron chain shattered like dust and she grabbed nothing. What's false is real, what's true is false. What's true in the heart is true, what's false in the heart is false. Qi flows to the Dantian. The venerable sovereign at the top of the tower quickly spat out a string of words. Ning Xuema was originally falling, but when she heard his words, she faintly felt a sense of familiarity. She didn't have time to think and immediately adjusted her breathing in the air. Her eyes flashed, and she finally saw that there was another transparent thin chain that was about the thickness of a strand of hair beside the thin chain. She chanted the wood incantation in her heart. Suddenly, a thin green vine flew out from her palm and wrapped around the transparent chain. This was real. Ning Xuema immediately sensed it. She flipped her wrist and used the force of the pole to flip up and land on top of the White Tower. Everything else was fake, but the White Tower couldn't be fake, right? As long as she used the force twice in the middle, she would be able to fly to the top of the tower. The tip of her foot landed on the wall of the White Tower and then sank inwards. Her foot seemed to have kicked into the void. Bastard, this White Tower was also fake. She helplessly watched the towering White Tower shatter under her feet and scatter in all directions like meteors. Even the venerable sovereign at the top of the tower directly disappeared. Why was it all fake? Wasn't it a little bit real? Ning Xuema almost wanted to curse during the process of falling. The wind whistled in her ears. Her body passed through the clouds below and then, plop. She fell into a warm embrace. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned her head and saw an enlarged white jade mask in front of her. Chapter 732. The pair of eyes behind the white jade mask were as dark as the abyss. At this moment, they were slightly curved into a beautiful arc. Xuema fell into his arms under his wide robe. His arm was around her waist and he spun in the air and rushed straight up. Ning Xuema's eyes blurred, and she had already landed on the glazed roof of the white jade tower. The top of the tower was narrow, less than 2 feet wide. She and the D-Zun stood side by side on the top, so their bodies were inevitably pressed against each other. The D-Zun's arm was around her waist, and his flowing hair gently fluttered over her neck, making her feel itchy. His white jade mask was different from the one Xuema saw last time. Last time, only his black eyes were exposed and the rest of his face was covered. But this time, not only could she see his eyes, but she could also see his perfectly curved lips. His lips were almost close to Xuema's ear, and his warm breath made her whole ear burn. Her body stiffened for a moment. His approach made her subconsciously feel dangerous and she couldn't help but whisper, "Let go of me." Her voice was a bit stiff. The D-Zun's eyes slightly deepened and he readily agreed, "Okay." His arm loosened and he really let go of her. As soon as he let go, Ning Xuema suddenly felt her feet slip. The glazed roof that she had stepped on turned into an illusion in the blink of an eye. She stepped on empty air and her heart was shocked and she subconsciously hugged him. So she hugged the D-Zun's waist again. The D-Zun looked down at her. "This time I didn't let go of you." Strangely, the moment her arms hugged his waist, the glazed roof under her feet turned solid again. Ning Xuema was speechless. Her pretty face was faintly red and she regretted listening to him. If she didn't have the idea of jumping up, she wouldn't be in such a dilemma. She turned her head to look at the path she came from, and began to think about jumping back. But after looking at the path, Xuema subconsciously tightened her arms around his waist. Clouds and mist rose from all sides like waves, surging in wave after wave. The white tower she and the ancestor were in was like a lone tower standing in the middle of a sea of clouds, with no land in sight. She couldn't find the mountain peak she had come from, let alone know where was the safest place to jump. "Are you scared?" The ancestor's voice seemed to contain a smile. There was a hint of teasing in his voice. Ning Xuema secretly gritted her teeth. "I'm not afraid," she replied stiffly. "If you're not afraid, then why are you hugging me so tightly? You seem to be hurting my waist." The ancestor looked down at her. The little girl was curled up on him like a koala. 2 warm and soft arms hugged his waist, hugging him so tightly. The ancestor felt that this feeling was very good, and he gently twirled the jade flute in his hand. Although Rong Yuetianlan wasn't very reliable at times, his method of picking up girls was quite reliable. The first way to pick up a girl: find a similar hobby. If the zither and the zither are compatible, you will definitely be able to hook the beauty's heart. This method didn't seem to work. He used the flute to summon Xuema, but she was still so guarded against him. The second method of picking up girls was to take risks together. It would be best if they fell off a cliff together so he could hug her justifiably. Generally, a beauty's heart would soften after a few hugs. The ancestor felt that this method was a bit difficult to do. With his kung fu, falling off a cliff wouldn't hurt him at all. Moreover, if they really fell off the cliff, the little girl had many ways to save herself, and he didn't need to save her at all. Chapter 733. Even if Xuema needed his help when she fell off the cliff, it would only take him a moment to save her. He had never heard of anyone who couldn't reach the bottom after falling off a cliff for a few minutes. The time was too short. Even if he hugged a beauty, he wouldn't feel anything. He couldn't fall off an ordinary cliff, but he couldn't risk falling off the cliff below the White Tower. The ancestor pondered for an hour before dawn and finally thought of the white tower that only he could climb. He had successfully fooled the little girl and now she was hugging him enthusiastically. The ancestor felt that he had made a profit this time. It was the first time he had been hugged like this. He looked at the little girl in his arms and felt a little strange. It turned out that this was the feeling of being hugged by the person you liked. His heart was warm and he subconsciously wanted to hug her back. However, Ning Xuema was clenching her teeth in her heart. What does this great deity mean? Was it really appropriate for him to tease her with his identity as the ancestor? Wasn't he afraid of exposing his identity in front of her? Xuema hugged his thin waist. Her nose was filled with his light fragrance, which made her feel a little dizzy and her heart beat faster. At the same time, there was an inexplicable repulsion. Xuema wanted to let go, but her survival instinct made her not dare to. If a drowning person caught a piece of driftwood, even if they knew it was a trap, they wouldn't let go easily. His teasing words made Xuema blush. She loosened her arms slightly and tried to calm herself down. Ancestor, please send me back to where I came from. I don't think this tower is a place I should come up. If you want to go back to where you came from, you need to work hard yourself. The ancestor said, his voice still flat. Work hard herself? How could she work hard? Now there was a vast expanse of clouds and mist, but the scenery was almost the same. Even the 8 sides of the White Tower were exactly the same. She couldn't tell which direction she was going, asking the ancestor to point me in the right direction. Ning Xuema tried her best to use words to distance the two of them. Her tone was incomparably polite. The ancestor looked down at her. She kept her head down so he couldn't see the expression on Xuema's face. However, her unfamiliarity with him made him feel uncomfortable. He said faintly, usually when I'm guiding someone that person is kneeling. Ning Xuema was speechless. Actually, it was not that she did not want to kneel down, but she could not let go of him now. Once she knelt down she would be hugging his legs. Hugging his waist she still felt a little pressured. If she hugged his leg, she felt that she was still a little shy. Just as she was in a dilemma, her waist suddenly tightened. The ancestor had finally hugged her. In the blink of an eye, the ancestor had already sat down with her in his arms. I've been a little tired recently, so I'll take a rest. Ning Xuema was carried in his arms in a princess carry position, half sitting on his lap. The ancestor's arm was wrapped around her waist, allowing her to lean on his chest. This posture was really not an ordinary intimate one. Moreover, once he sat down, there was no place for her to stand. Ning Xuema raised her face to look at his white jade mask. Her body was a little stiff. She didn't understand the meaning behind his series of actions. Or perhaps she understood it in her heart, but subconsciously avoided it. Moreover, once he sat down, even if she wanted to go all out and kneel down, she couldn't find a place to do so. Ancestor? Ning Xuema didn't know what he was selling in his gourd. She could only sit stiffly in his arms and cope with the changes by sticking to the status quo. Chapter 734. The ancestor closed his eyes slightly and said lightly, I'm going to rest for a while. Don't disturb me. Ning Xuema was speechless. Is he going to meditate here? But he could just sit there and meditate. Why did he have to make her sit in his arms? In this case, Ning Xuema couldn't jump out of his arms with a chaste face. She simply sat on his body and looked around. When she came up, the White Tower was not far from the road she came from. She remembered that it was only a few dozen feet away, so she should be able to see it at a glance. The reason why she couldn't see it now was probably because it was covered by some array or some kind of spell. What method should she use to make the mountain appear again? She looked around again and again trying to find a flaw in it. But it was strange. When she looked at the White Tower from the opposite mountain, she only saw white clouds around the White Tower. The sea of clouds undulated like thin waves, which was the same as the sea of clouds she saw on other mountains. But at this moment, sitting on the top of the White Tower with the ancestor, she found that the white clouds were constantly changing, and their shapes were all kinds of strange. Sometimes it was like a battlefield where two armies were facing each other. All kinds of people appeared on the battlefield, fighting back and forth, and all kinds of arrays emerged endlessly. Sometimes, it was like a martial arts competition between several masters. The people formed by the white clouds made all kinds of movements, and each scene was like a slow-motion movie. Every move and every style could be seen clearly. Moreover, every single one of those moves was something Ning Xuema had never seen or heard of before. At first, she was a little absent-minded, but after watching a few scenes in succession, she slowly sat up and looked at the movements of those white clouds. She couldn't help but start to remember those martial arts. The more she watched, the more addicted she became. In the end, she was so engrossed that she forgot where she was and that she was sitting in the ancestor's arms. Addicted to watching, she couldn't help but stretch out her hands subconsciously. The ancestor opened his eyes and looked at her, who was completely fascinated in his arms. She had lost a lot of weight and there were many red streaks in her eyes. This showed how hard she had been working recently. His palm seemed to have accidentally pressed on her back. Soon, he measured her current level of psychokinesis according to the flow of psychokinesis in her body. She was at the 7.5 level of the human realm. In the past, he wouldn't even bother to look at this level of telekinesis. But it was a miracle for this little girl. To be able to cultivate to such a level in just a few short months, it was truly a legend that no ordinary person would have ever imagined. Perhaps she was the weakest in the Sun-Moon sect, but in other sects she was a fine jade that others couldn't even dream of snatching. He had seen how difficult her journey had been. Now that Shuema could be like this, he was very gratified. She was not ordinary. She had too many miracles that made people's eyes light up. Like a shining magnet, it attracted the attention of countless people. Of course, it also attracted his attention. She had created so many miracles, so it should be related to her soul. In fact, Dizun had noticed from the very beginning that she and her body were not the same person. It was as if she had reincarnated in another body. He had a slight suspicion that her original body was from the devil world, but after seeing Shuema's illusion in the stone spirit's stomach, he knew that she was indeed a human, a real human. However, the soul came from a different world that even he didn't know about. Chapter 735. Shuema's mind was full of wonderful ideas, and some of her actions were shocking. At first he didn't like it, but after looking at her for a long time, he felt that this was who she was, and it was this kind of her that attracted his attention. The ancestor felt that his vision was very good, and the people he liked were naturally the best. This kind of unpolished jade was dug out by him, and in time, as long as the rough stone skin was worn away, she would shine like a beautiful jade. He secretly checked Shuema's internal breath. There was indeed a slight deviation, but it was far from the point of qi deviation. Yelu Jing and didn't dare to have any physical contact with her, so he panicked when he saw her vomit blood. According to the ancestor's deduction, her qi should have gone a little astray, which stimulated some of the accumulated poison in her body, causing her to vomit blood. In fact, vomiting blood should be a good thing as the remaining poison came out. Moreover, she seemed to have recuperated herself, so he felt that there wasn't anything wrong with her body. It seemed that although this little girl practiced with all her might, she didn't disregard her life. The ancestor was very relieved. He pressed his palm on her back and quietly sent in a bit of psychokinesis to recuperate her qi and blood. Only when she was completely fine did he let go. At this time, Ning Shuema was completely attracted by the white cloud person, so she entered a state of oblivion. She didn't pay attention to what the ancestor was doing to her body. He looked at Shuema in his arms. She had lost a lot of weight and her chin was sharp. Perhaps it was because she was wearing a wine-red dress, but her face didn't look pale. Because she was practicing, her cheeks were faintly red like rouge on white jade. Her black hair covered her forehead, and in the middle of her hair was a bright red coral hairpin. The rest of her hair fell over her shoulders, making her eyes look even bigger and her mouth small. Her eyelashes were so long that they could almost hold a brush. At this moment she was focused, and her beautiful face was full of expressions. Her eyes were shining like clear water. He suddenly had an impulse to kiss her. Sitting in the arms of a beautiful woman was a test of a man's willpower. What's more, she was moving in his arms from time to time, rubbing here and there, making his breath a little unstable. He had been working hard for her these past few days. Even with his physique, he was almost at the end of his rope. He couldn't continue meditating in the ice cave because he heard that she almost went berserk. Therefore, the ancestor simply came out of seclusion early this morning. He checked on her, who was sleeping soundly in the side chamber, and only left when he felt that she was fine. He came here to let Ning Shuema throw herself into his arms. Secondly, he really wanted to recover here. The heaven and earth spirit qi here was much more abundant than in other places. It was much better for him to cultivate here than in other places. His plan was to meditate with Shuema in his arms. With her wisdom, she should be able to see some of the formations formed by the white clouds. Naturally, she would be able to cultivate. Everything was developing according to his expectations. The only thing he didn't expect was himself. With the beauty in his arms, he was no longer worried about Shuema, but he still couldn't calm down and meditate. Some of her unconscious movements were fatal to him, and he couldn't help but have a reaction. Originally, when he saw her, he wanted to protect her under his wings and watch her grow up healthily. When he saw that she didn't walk the right path, he would feel angry. That feeling was like looking at a bright pearl that was covered with a layer of dirt. Chapter 736. The Dizun wanted to wipe away the stains with lightning-fast methods, wiping away all the bad things about her. Therefore he used methods to punish her. Although in the process of punishment he had a strange feeling of heartache, but he didn't regret it, because he knew that it was for her own good. He didn't want a bright pearl to be buried like this. This feeling was more similar to cherishing talent, but it was not the same as the feeling he had for his own disciple. But he couldn't tell what was different about it. Now he didn't know when his feelings for Shuema had changed. Originally he just wanted to keep her by his side, but now he wanted to hold her in his arms and press her under his body. This was the first time he had felt this way. It made him feel novel and a little at a loss. For the first time in his life he had the idea of wanting a person. Looking at her gesticulating in his arms, he was reminded of her stunning pipa dance. At that time he seemed to have the idea of holding Shuema in his arms, wanting her to only bloom in front of him. Such a hot dance. Her body was soft like a willow, and her waist was like a snake. She was like a demon tempting people to eat the forbidden fruit. His lower abdomen tightened again. It was as if hot blood was gathering at a certain point. Ning Shuema was dancing when she suddenly felt a little uncomfortable under her body. She was still immersed in those movements. After feeling a little uncomfortable, she couldn't help but grab the thing under her body, trying to push it away. This grab was very accurate. Thereupon, the Dizun. His body instantly tensed up. Ning Shuema felt that something was wrong. She couldn't push it away and it seemed to be harder. She even felt the scorching temperature on it. She frowned but still didn't react. She pulled the thing to the side again. She heard a low gasp. "Let go." The voice was cold with a hint of hoarseness. The hot and magnetic voice rippled in her ears. Ning Shuema's ears were hot, and she finally woke up. By the time she realized what she was holding, blood rushed to her cheeks. Her face was so hot that it was almost burning. She hurriedly let go and jumped up. In her nervousness she forgot that she was at the top of the White Tower. The moment she jumped up, she immediately flipped over and fell down. Dizun was speechless. His soul was almost blown away by that grab. By the time he reacted, the beauty on his lap had already fallen into the sea of clouds. His expression changed. He cursed under his breath and jumped down as well. He fell down again. She fell down again. Ning Shuema only had this thought in her mind as the wind whistled past her ears. Fortunately, she finally gained some experience from falling. She immediately adjusted her body in the air and prepared to grab anything she could grab along the way. However, there was none. Around her were white clouds that were scattered by her rapidly falling body. Other than these, she couldn't even catch a single strand of grass. Speed meditation mantra. A voice suddenly sounded in his ear. It was the ancestors. He quickly said the name of a mental cultivation method. Ning Shuema's heart skipped a beat. She immediately recalled the mental cultivation method that allowed her to walk in the air. However, how did the ancestor know? She remembered that she had learned this mental cultivation method after the adventure in the Tianshu Mountains. She rarely had the chance to use it, and she had never used it in front of the ancestor. This was naturally not the time to think about these questions. Ning Shuema immediately activated the mental cultivation method. Chapter 737. Because she hadn't practiced this technique for a long time, she was a little unfamiliar with it. When she used it for the first time, she even stumbled a little. Moreover, the speed of falling was too fast. In a flash, she had fallen a few hundred meters. This cliff wasn't very deep. It was only a little more than 1,000 meters. It was like parachuting. There had to be enough height to open the parachute. And the place Ning Shuema fell from was too low. Before she could fully adjust her mental cultivation method, she could already see a large patch of withered yellow flying towards her. The trees were brandishing their fangs and brandishing their claws. They were like tyrannical crabs pointing at the sky. Ning Shuema's body was falling towards those branches. Although her martial arts were very high now, falling in this state without any support, the force of gravity and acceleration was still very shocking. If she fell like this, she would most likely break some branches, but she would also most likely be skewered like a tonghulu. Even if she didn't become a tonghulu, it was very likely that she would fall and break her legs and arms. Idiot! A whisper sounded in her ear. A white figure flashed in front of her eyes. Her waist was immediately tightened. She was held in someone's arms. The person spun in the air like a whirlwind, reducing most of the force of her fall. Crack. Crash. Paw. Because the speed was too fast, Ning Xuema heard the sound of countless branches breaking the moment she was hugged. Then with a thud she was smashed into a pile of withered leaves. The leaves around her danced wildly. Ning Xuema's forehead heavily knocked against an ice-cold object, causing her head to ring and stars to appear in front of her eyes. She shook her head. After the stars scattered, she finally found herself in someone's arms. In front of her was the enlarged white jade mask of the ancestor. In other words, the ancestor was her meat cushion. Under the white jade mask, his black jade-like eyes were slightly closed. He lay there motionless. Damn it. He wouldn't be knocked unconscious, would he? Ning Xuema scrambled to get up from his body. Dizun had protected her very well. Apart from her head hitting the Dizun's mask, she didn't hit anything else. Her arms and legs were still as nimble as before. The first thing she did after jumping up was to check on the ancestor. He lay there with countless withered leaves beneath him. Countless withered leaves had also fallen onto his loose white robes. He did not move at all, as if he had really fainted. It can't be. He was the omnipotent venerable sovereign. Falling off a cliff could knock him out? Wasn't this too fantastical? Or was this one of his methods? One couldn't blame Ning Xuema for thinking this way. In her mind, the ancestor was too powerful. Moreover, she had indeed suffered a few hidden losses, so she subconsciously guarded against him. Sovereign? Dizun. Ning Xuema squatted beside him and gently patted his arm. The ancestor's eyes were still closed and he didn't move. Ning Xuema didn't give up. She called him several times but he still didn't move. Even his eyelashes didn't move. Wasn't he completely dizzy? He was pretending. He must be pretending. She didn't believe that such a godlike person could faint from falling. If this spread out, no one would believe it. She also didn't believe it. Maybe this was another one of his methods. Ning Xuema stood up. Ancestor, are you just lying down here to rest? Or do you want to borrow some earth energy? Chapter 738. Okay then, Xuema won't disturb you for the time being. I'll go ahead and check the road first. Ning Xuema said as she walked. She had already seen that she had fallen into a forest. The other forests were basically a mix of trees with all kinds of tree species, tall and short. Strangely, there was only one tree here. The trunk of this kind of big tree was iron gray in color. Because all the leaves had fallen, the branches were like thick and thin iron bars, malevolent like the claws of a demon, reaching into the air. There were cracks on the trunk of the main tree. Upon closer inspection, those cracks looked like the facial features of an ugly person. At first glance, it looked like a ghost's face was grinning at people. Although Ning Xuema was bold, she was still shocked by the ghost's face on the tree. She clenched her fingers. Looking up, there were undulating clouds above her head. She had clearly fallen from the mountain peak, but she couldn't see any shadow of the mountain in this dense forest. It was as if she had fallen from a high place out of thin air. It was obviously the beginning of winter. The leaves on the big trees had all fallen and the cold wind was blowing. Logically speaking, the forest should be very dry. However, she smelled a damp smell. The smell of the withered leaves seemed to be mixed with other smells. Ning Xuema sniffed, but she couldn't smell what it was. She looked around again. Reflected in her eyes were the big trees that looked like ghost faces. It was obviously daytime, but the sun couldn't be seen here. However, the light was still very bright. Such a bright place gave people a kind of gloomy and cold air which made people feel cold. It was a very strange place. She didn't expect that there would be such an evil place under the holy white tower. She turned her head to look at Dizun. Dizun, who was always obsessed with cleanliness, was still lying there pretending to be unconscious. What kind of trick was he playing? Such a question flashed through Ning Xuema's mind. She had a very strange feeling about Dizun. He had saved her time and time again. Obviously, she could rely on him, but subconsciously she was always on guard against him. Even Xuema herself didn't know what was going on with this kind of mentality. Furthermore, she had been preoccupied with practicing martial arts recently, so she was too lazy to analyze these trivial matters. Therefore, after deducing that the Almighty couldn't have fainted from falling off a cliff, she assumed that his current actions were intentional. As for why the ancestor had pretended to faint, she couldn't figure it out at the moment. Anyway, don't try to guess the Almighty's thoughts. You won't understand no matter how hard you try. Because of this, Ning Xuema simply stopped caring about him. The Almighty was lying there pretending to be unconscious. Seeing that she wasn't fooled, he would probably get up soon. She didn't need to worry too much. Ancestor, you can rest here. I'll go ahead and explore the path. She didn't care if he could hear her or not. After saying this, she turned around and went ahead to explore the path. There was no path in the dense forest. There were only dense weeds under their feet. Occasionally there would be long snakes, centipedes, and other creatures crawling under their feet. These trees looked a little strange, but there didn't seem to be any danger in this dense forest. Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief. This was the ancestors' territory, so how could there be anything evil here? She walked forward for a while, but the surrounding scenery was still the same. There was no change. Ning Xuema looked back again. Standing at her position, she couldn't see the ancestor's shadow. He didn't chase after her. Was he meditating in the same place? Chapter 739. A woo. A long wolf howl came from the depths of the forest. Ning Xuema's footsteps paused. There were wolves. It seemed like there were still ferocious beasts in this forest. With her current ability, she naturally wasn't afraid of wolves. Even if there were 8 or 10 of them, they wouldn't be able to do anything to her. However, since there were wolves, there would be other ferocious beasts. Just in case, she had to bring some weapons or hidden weapons with her. She looked at the iron-gray branches. These branches looked very hard. It shouldn't be a problem for her to make a stick to defend herself. Xuema had always been cautious. She first used the silver hairpin on her head to scratch the tree trunk. She wanted to see if there was any poison before climbing the tree. However, after the silver hairpin scratched the tree trunk, her heart slightly jumped. With her current strength, even if it was refined iron, this hairpin would still be able to make a scratch on it. However, after she scratched the tree, she didn't even leave a mark. Isn't this tree too hard? She tried scratching it a few more times, but it was still useless. After she scratched it a few times, she felt that the ghost faces on the tree trunk were mocking her. The corners of their ugly lips curled up. Her heart trembled. Was she seeing things? She turned to look at the other trees and compared them with the one she scratched. She suddenly took a step back. The ghost faces on this tree were indeed different from the other trees. The ghost faces on the other trees drooped their lips and drooped their eyes. They looked like they were crying. Only this tree was smiling. Even though she was brave, she still felt the hair on her body stand up. She took another step back and her back hit another tree. Then, as if she was burned, she jumped forward a step. The force she used to hit the tree was very small, but her back felt like it was stung by a wasp. It was painful and numb. The small piece of muscle she hit was actually hard and numb. This tree was poisonous. And it was a kind of poison she had never seen before. Oh, whoa. Not far away there were several wolf howls, as if some wolves had found prey and were calling for their companions. Ning Xuema's expression changed slightly. She suddenly jumped and ran in the direction of the wolf howls. Dizun was in that direction. He was still lying there. When he fell, he used his body to protect himself. It was his body that broke the branches of the ghost-faced tree. This tree was so hard it was as hard as iron. He was lucky that he didn't get skewered. There was an 80 to 90% chance that he was really injured and had fainted. He had left him there. If he was bitten by the wolves here. Fortunately, Ning Xuema's sense of direction was exceptionally good. Like a gust of wind, she directly rushed back. From afar, she could see pairs of oily green eyes flashing in the dense forest. Wolf pack. Wolves were not scary. With Ning Xuema's kung fu, it was not a problem for her to deal with 8 or 10 wolves. But what if 180 of them appeared in one go? Or perhaps it was far more than this number? Those green wolf eyes appeared in all directions, densely packed. There were no less than 300 to 400 of them. Moreover, the direction in which the wolves were surrounding was where the ancestor was lying. They probably thought that the ancestor was a delicious prey. If Ning Xuema saw such a large number of wolves on a normal day, she would have decided to run away before the wolves saw her. But now she was running even faster in that direction. She had to drag him out before those Wolf Dynasty venerable emperors bit him. If a dignified venerable emperor was bitten by a wolf, it would be the biggest joke in the world. Chapter 740. At the same time, this would make Ning Xuema's reputation as a heavenly calamity star even more famous. Even Dizun was killed by her. Wouldn't that make her the #1 jinx in the world? Even Xuema herself couldn't forgive herself. The alpha wolf probably noticed Ning Xuema running from afar and let out a low howl. Then 7 or 8 gray wolves pounced on Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema didn't stop. When the wolves pounced on her with their mouths wide open, she threw the stone she had prepared in her palm. Oh whoa! The wolves howled miserably. The wolves jumped more than 10 feet high and then fell to the ground. They scratched their necks with their claws as if something was stuck in their throats. They couldn't breathe and the pain was unbearable. Ning Xuema didn't look back after throwing the stones. She knew that the wolves were no longer a threat to her. She didn't shoot at the heads or bodies of the wolves, but at their throats. The stones went straight into the wolves' mouths and hit their throats. In addition, the stones were smeared with the poison of the ghost face tree. How could the wolves survive under the pincer attack of the two? As she expected, after the wolves fell to the ground, they kicked and scratched a few times and then stopped moving. The alpha wolf was naturally unwilling to give up. It howled again and several wolves pounced on her. It seemed that this wolf had some intelligence. Seeing that they were coming at her aggressively, it turned its attention to her. It probably wanted to get rid of her first before anything else. These wolves were different from the ones Ning Xuema usually saw. Not only were they bigger than ordinary wolves, but they were also more ferocious. They weren't afraid of death and were quite intelligent. The wolves just now had their mouths open when they were attacked. The second pack learned their lesson and closed their mouths tightly. When they pounced on her, they used their sharp claws. Ning Xuema coldly smiled and threw out another handful of pebbles. This time she didn't shoot at their mouths but at their delicate eyes. This kind of wolf had copper skin and iron bones. Ordinary weapons couldn't hurt them. However, no matter how thick and hard their skin was, they couldn't equip their eyes. A few more miserable howls were heard. Blood flowed out of the eyes of the wolves. They fell to the ground and kicked their hooves a few times before they stopped moving. In this way, Ning Xuema once again used stones to deal with two groups of wolves that attacked her. Finally, she saw Di Zun's figure. When she saw the scene clearly, she was so shocked that her hair almost stood on end. The ancestor was still lying there. His body seemed to be surrounded by a layer of faint white light. Around the white light were more than a dozen wolves. These wolves were obviously a size larger than the other wolves around them. Their eyes were not green but scarlet, emitting an ominous glint. One of them was especially tall and sturdy like an ox. It even had a horn as sharp as a blade on its head. This was obviously the alpha wolf. These wolves were crazily biting the protective white light around the ancestor's body, causing the white light to tremble incessantly. As for the alpha wolf, it used the sharp horn on its head to stab the white light. Every time it stabbed, the white light would emit a kind of popping sound, as if it would break immediately. Fortunately, the ancestor's body had a protective spiritual energy. Otherwise, when she came back, she was afraid that she would only be able to pick up a few pieces of his bones. Ning Xuema rushed over. The wolves surrounding the ancestor were obviously not easy to deal with like the other wolves. When they attacked, their bodies were like lightning. Their sharp teeth and claws flashed with cold light. Ning Xuema threw 7 or 8 stones in succession, but they were all neatly dodged by them. Chapter 741. Xuema would have been injured by their sharp teeth and claws if she didn't have a special skill. Moreover, these wolves seemed to have been trained. They even knew how to form a formation. 8 wolves attacked Ning Xuema from 8 different directions. They rose and fell one after another, advancing and retreating in a measured manner. They covered each other and attacked each other in a crisscross pattern. Like a violent storm, they attacked Ning Xuema, not giving her any chance to catch her breath. The claws and teeth of these wolves were obviously poisonous. Sometimes they didn't hit Ning Xuema, but hit the stones next to her. Anything that was hit by them would emit a wisp of green smoke. There was a fishy smell in the green smoke which made people want to vomit. If Ning Xuema didn't deal with poisons all year round, she would have been dizzy just by smelling this smell. Fortunately, her skills were much better than before. She also knew how to form a formation. After several attacks by the wolves, she mastered their attack frequency and used her flexible skills to avoid them. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to resist such a dense attack. These 8 wolves should be the guards of the alpha wolf. They trapped Ning Xuema in a place and didn't let her get close to Di Zun. As for the head wolf, it continued to gnaw at the white light barrier around Meng Cid. It was also going all out. It bit, stabbed, scratched. It even used the earth element. Occasionally, with a slap of its claws, many sharp stones would drill out from the ground and fiercely stab Di Zun. Fortunately, Di Zun had a protective barrier under him. Otherwise, his ass would have been pierced. The white barrier around Di Zun's body became lighter and thinner under the continuous attack of the alpha wolf. It seemed that he couldn't hold on for more than a quarter of an hour. Ning Xuema, who was busy, naturally saw all this. She was very anxious. However, the 8 wolves besieging her were not only fast, but they also didn't seem to have any weak points. Ning Xuema didn't know how many stones she had flicked at them. Some of them even hit their eyes, but their eyelids were like steel shields. As long as they slightly closed their eyes, they would be able to block the stones Ning Xuema flicked at them. How was this a wolf made of flesh and blood? This was simply an iron wolf. How was she going to kill them? There were several times when Ning Xuema wanted to bypass these wolves and rush to the ancestors' side. They were all forced back by the wolves' sharp claws and fangs. Later, when she saw the alpha wolf use its earth magic, she had an idea. Would counters earth? Would it be better if she used some wood chips or branches to attack? However, those trees were poisonous, so she couldn't climb them. The ground was surrounded by weeds and there wasn't even a decent thorn. She couldn't find any wooden weapons. During the fight, she looked around and suddenly saw a few scattered branches not far away. His heart skipped a beat. Those branches should have been broken when the ancestor carried her down and smashed into the trees. She didn't notice it back then, but now, it had become her only hope to defeat the pack of wolves. She immediately tried to draw near to the scattered branches. The purpose of the pack of wolves was to prevent her from getting close to the ancestor. They didn't care much about her moving in other directions. Because the place where the branches were scattered was in the opposite direction to the ancestor's position, the wolves couldn't wait for her to get as far away from the ancestor as possible. When they saw her moving in that direction, they went easy on her. Therefore, Ning Xuema moved in that direction more easily. As she moved closer, she tore a piece of cloth to wrap her hand. Chapter 742. After all, the wolves were not as intelligent as humans, so they didn't understand what Ning Xuema's actions meant. Xuema was more slippery than a fish. Although she couldn't hurt the wolves, they couldn't even touch a corner of her clothes, so they couldn't hurt her at all. These wolves also had some brains and knew that Ning Xuema was a tough nut to crack. Therefore, their only thought was to delay her and not let her get close to Di Zun. What they really coveted was Di Zun's flesh and blood. Therefore, the further Ning Xuema was away from Di Zun, the more relaxed their attacks were, and the easier it was for Ning Xuema. Finally, she got close to the pile of scattered branches. Only now did she see the shape of the branches clearly. There were also small demon faces on the branches. There was no fresh wood at the broken part, but it looked like a steel bar that had been forcibly broken. The edges were as sharp as a knife. When Di Zun fell down with her in his arms, he was stabbed by the broken part. His back was probably full of scars. However, because he was lying on his back, Ning Xuema didn't see the wounds. Also, because he was usually too strong, Xuema didn't check, which led to this accident and misunderstanding. She had almost killed him. Ning Xuema finally grabbed a broken branch that she had already set her eyes on. This branch was as thick as a forearm and as heavy as an iron rod. When she waved it, it created a whistling sound. Because Ning Xuema's hands were already wrapped in a thick cloth, the poison on the branch's skin didn't spread to her hands. It was a super handy weapon. With this weapon in hand, Ning Xuema was like a tiger that had grown wings. She immediately took the initiative and attacked the pack of wolves that had been biting her like a storm. She guessed correctly. These wolves were indeed afraid of wood attribute attacks. The thick branch in Ning Xuema's hand was indeed their nemesis. Adding on the fact that the tip of the branch was as sharp as a knife, it didn't take long for her to stab two of the wolf guards. After being pierced by Ning Xuema's branches, the wolf's skin, which was impenetrable by swords and spears, would have a bloody wound. The trunk of the ghost-faced tree was poisonous. The poison entered the wolf's body through the wounds, making the wolf feel as if thousands of steel needles were piercing its body. The injured wolf could no longer attack Ning Xuema. It could only crazily jump and howl. Its voice was so shrill that it seemed to pierce through people's eardrums. Of the 8 wolves, 2 were injured, so naturally they could no longer form a formation to attack. Ning Xuema was also not in the mood to continue fighting. Brandishing the ghost-faced tree branch, he charged in the direction of the ancestor once again. The other wolves naturally came to stop her, but at this moment, Ning Xuema was like a little tiger coming down the mountain. She was unstoppable. Except for a few wolf corpses that were sent flying by her, nothing else could stop her. The alpha wolf was about to break through the protective enchantment of the delicious meat. Suddenly, it saw Ning Xuema rushing over like a female demon and was shocked. Ning Xuema swept the branch in her hand toward the alpha wolf's head. The alpha wolf did not dare to face the sharp edge of the branch directly and could only dodge and retreat. After all, the alpha wolf was the most intelligent. When it saw that things were not going well, although it was unwilling, it would not fight recklessly with Ning Xuema. It immediately retreated into the wolf pack and urged the other wolves to attack Ning Xuema again. It wanted to tire her out by taking turns to tire her out. This time there were 300 to 400 wolves. Ning Xuema had only killed 30 to 40 wolves. The main force of the wolf pack was still there. Wolves were the animals with the strongest endurance. The wolves in this forest were even more outstanding, so they were not in a hurry. Chapter 743. Ning Xuema finally arrived in front of Di Zun, but she was alone after all. Under the continuous attacks of the wolves, she couldn't take Di Zun away. She could only protect him behind her and fight with the attacking wolves. While she was busy, she also looked at Di Zun's face in the white light. His eyes were closed as if he was meditating, and even his breathing was very weak. She could barely see the rise and fall of his chest. Di Zun was still wearing the mask, so Ning Xuema couldn't see his face clearly, so she was a little uncertain. She could only call out to him, "Di Zun, Di Zun? Di Zun, wake up, wake up." Of course her call had no effect on him. "Master, Master." Ning Xuema was fighting with the wolves when Kirin's call suddenly appeared in her mind. Ning Xuema was a little surprised, and then she was overjoyed. Recently, Kirin had been unreliable. Every time she was in danger, it wasn't by her side, so when Ning Xuema was in danger, she forgot about it. At this moment, when she heard its call, she was overjoyed. She didn't want to talk nonsense with Kirin, so she directly told Kirin where she was and asked it to hurry over. Kirin was the king of all beasts. As long as it came, it could scare away the wolves. Fortunately, Kirin was also on Buddha Lotus Mountain. Fortunately, there should be no enchantment on Tianin Peak now, so Kirin should be able to enter and come to this place smoothly. Kirin had caused a lot of trouble recently, so Di Zun asked it to stay in a place to reflect and not to disturb its master for a few days. It had been very obedient these days, cultivating and practicing martial arts obediently, even more obedient than a house cat. It had not been separated from Ning Xuema for a long time, so it didn't know how she was recovering. It was actually very worried about her. Today he had tried to contact his master. It planned to just say a few words to its master. Di Zun wouldn't know and wouldn't punish it, however, it didn't expect to know that Ning Xuema was besieged by a pack of wolves. It immediately jumped up. Its chance to perform a meritorious deed had finally come. It wanted to punish those wolves who didn't know what was good for them. They actually dared to besiege its master, the king of all beasts. They were really tired of living. It followed Ning Xuema's direction and ran through the bamboo forest, and saw the White Tower. Kirin had practiced the cloud riding. After it heard that Ning Xuema fell from the White Tower, in order to land quickly and accurately beside Ning Xuema, it had to give its all. According to Xuema's words, it only needed to jump from the top of the mountain. It was afraid that it would make another mistake, so it jumped with all its might towards the White Pagoda. It wanted to jump on top of the tower first and then it's before jumping down. However, it didn't expect that when its claws touched the White Tower, it immediately felt that something was wrong. The seemingly sturdy White Tower was crushed into powder under its claws. It stepped on nothing and fell down directly. Fortunately, when it felt that something was wrong, it immediately adjusted its body in the air and wanted to land slowly. However, it didn't expect that just as it adjusted its body, a strong suction force came from below. Kirin's body was sucked down like a cannonball. "Ah!" Kirin nervously opened its mouth and shouted. Seeing a piece of iron dust coming toward it, it only had time to scratch with its claws. Chapter 744. Kirin's scream was accompanied by a series of crackling sounds. Finally, it landed on the ground like a thunderbolt. Bang! The little Qilin felt as if it had smashed into an iron-gray living animal. It was hard but slightly soft. It hurt so much. Kirin fell on its back. Stars were flying in front of its eyes. Its body was burning with pain as if it had been electrocuted. It was still worried about its master. It endured the discomfort and jumped up. Its nose smelled blood. It looked down and saw a tall wolf on the ground. It had been smashed into a pancake. Needless to say, when it fell, it had hit the unlucky wolf and made it its cushion. The wolf was here. How could its master crush it? Kirin shook its head to shake off the little stars that were still flying in front of its eyes. It looked around and finally saw its master. Ning Xuema was holding a man in white whose back was dripping with blood. She was staring at it with lingering fear. It was too close. When Kirin fell, it almost hit Di Zun, who was lying on the ground. Ning Xuema saw that it was falling in a bad way and reacted decisively. It was strange that at the critical moment, Ning Xuema broke through the wizardry barrier and dragged Di Zun back a few steps. She was also afraid that this reckless Kirin would fall to its death, so she kicked a wolf that had just rushed over. It happened to be in the direction where Kirin landed and became its cushion. The pack of wolves was shocked by the sudden landing of this huge monster. They all stepped back and looked at it from afar. Master. Kirin ran toward Ning Xuema. Master, are you okay? Who is this person you are holding? So much blood. Adizun. The last few words turned into an unbelievable scream. Ning Xuema rubbed the space between her eyebrows, feeling a headache. Didn't I tell you to fly down? What a pity that you didn't tell me the approximate distance. It still came crashing down like this. Kirin also felt wronged. This place is different from other places. There's a suction force here, so we can't use the cloud riding technique. The scales on its body were thick, and at the critical moment, it had used its claws to push away the branches that were blocking its way. With the wolf at the bottom, it was not seriously injured and only a few scales were scratched on its body. Even so, it was in so much pain that it wanted to stomp its feet. But for the sake of its master, it endured. Kirin looked at the wolves that were scattered in the distance but refused to leave. He felt a little strange. It was the king of all beasts. Even if it was a lion or a tiger, when it saw it, it would be scared to the point that it would shrink into a ball like a chicken. Its roar could make them run away in fear. What's wrong with these wolves? He wasn't afraid of it. This doesn't make sense. The little Qilin roared at them, and the sound shook the mountain forest, shaking the fallen leaves on the ground with a rustling sound. The wolves were startled by the howl and retreated a few steps, but they still refused to leave. The wolves here seemed to be different from those in other places. They were not bound by the rules of this continent. Kirin roared a few times, but it didn't make them retreat. It felt embarrassed in front of its master and was very angry. It roared again and ran toward the wolves. It wanted to give them a show of strength. Suddenly, a howl came from the pack of wolves. Countless wolves actually pounced towards the little Qilin. Ning Xuema's expression changed slightly. She also noticed that the beasts here were different from those in other places. Chapter 745. In other places, when Kirin met with those beasts, he would scare them. With his identity, those beasts would be scared witless. However, the wolves here dared to fight with Kirin. Ning Xuema knew that Kirin's real ability was not very high. Once they fought, he might not be a match for these wolves. There are too many wolves. He is no match for them. A voice sounded behind her. Ning Xuema's body stiffened. She abruptly turned her head and saw the ancestor leaning against a large rock. Behind the white jade mask, his eyes were already open. His line of sight fell on the little Qilin in the distance. Kirin had been surrounded by wolves. From time to time, various howls could be heard from the circle. Blood flew from time to time, and under the thin sunlight, it was a tragic beauty. Ning Xuema was holding the ancestor and couldn't avoid the attack of the wolves. So she put him on the big rock and guarded him. Seeing that he woke up, Xuema was relieved. Ancestor, where is this place? The ancestor glanced at her indifferently. This is the dark forest. It was originally the place where I trained my disciples. So, this is the dark forest. Ning Xuema had heard Yi Qingwan mention this place more than once. She had always thought that the dark forest was some barren place outside Buddha Lotus Mountain. She didn't expect that it was under the White Tower. So, this is the ancestor's territory. Then these wolves, are they also reared by the ancestor? Reared wolves? Did he think that he was very free? The wolves here were born from the hostility of heaven and earth. Every tree here has countless wolf souls imprisoned. When one group falls, another group will come out from the wolf soul tree. They are endless and can't be killed. It was rare for the ancestor to open his mouth and explain so much. So these ghost-faced trees were called wolf soul trees. Then the ghost-faced faces on the trees were actually wolf faces? If that was the case, it was indeed inexhaustible. She pondered for a moment, and a fierce wind came from behind her. She didn't even look back as she turned around and stabbed two wolves that were about to sneak up on her from behind, preparing to launch a sneak attack, sending them flying. We can't stay here. We have to leave quickly. 30 miles southeast of here is a body of water called Buddha Lotus Lake. Wolves don't dare to go there. The ancestor spoke again. He was obviously very weak. After he finished speaking, he was a little short of breath. Ning Xuema actually wanted to ask him why he was so weak, but at such a critical moment, it was naturally not the time to chat about such trivial matters. She nodded slightly and said, "All right. Then let's go to that Buddha Lotus Lake." He then looked at Dizun and asked, "Dizun, is it convenient for you to walk by yourself?" If an ordinary person had suffered such an injury, they would naturally not be able to move. But as for the ancestor, Ning Xuema always felt that the ancestor would never fall. He was omnipotent. The ancestor glanced at her, a faint light flickering in his eyes. You want to abandon this king again? Ning Xuema was stunned. She remembered what she had done just now. It seemed that she had indeed abandoned him, however, she did not think that he was really injured and thought that he was faking it. Hey, he was obviously unconscious just now. How did he know that she had abandoned him? This king didn't faint. I just couldn't move at that time. The ancestor's words cleared her doubts. His thin lips behind the mask slightly pursed. I'm sorry. Ning Xuema was actually very guilty. Because of her mistake in judgment, the ancestor had almost died in the mouth of the wolves. Chapter 746. Di Zun looked at her without saying anything. Just now, Ning Xuema didn't even look back and left him alone. He was still a little disappointed. He was seriously injured because of her, but Xuema actually abandoned him. Her heart was not ordinary. From this, he could see that she didn't have much affection for him. Di Zun used his divine sense to sense her running away without looking back. He didn't know what to feel. Originally, he could have woken up quickly, but because of his restless state of mind, his injuries worsened and he almost fainted. This place was his territory, so he naturally knew what was in this place. Therefore, when he used his inner breath to recuperate, he first released a protective barrier to avoid the fate of being eaten by the wolves. When those wolves were biting his protective barrier, Di Zun naturally felt it. He originally wanted to release his primordial spirit to deal with the wolves, but he found that this heartless little girl had rushed back. At that moment, his calm heart actually felt warm, so he simply withdrew his primordial spirit back into his body to see how this little girl would save him. Seeing her desperately deal with the wolves, seeing her break the wolves' attack formation again and again, seeing her quickly find the wolves' weakness and kill dozens of them in one breath, he felt gratified. He didn't misjudge her. This was indeed the place where he trained his disciples, but only when his disciples' psychokinesis reached Earth Realm Level 3 could he kick them here to train. Ning Xuema's psychokinesis was only around Earth Realm Level 7, so coming here was basically courting death. That was why after she slipped and fell he jumped down without thinking. When he saw Xuema ignoring him and leaving by herself, he was a little worried for her. He was afraid that she would encounter the wolves alone and not be able to deal with them. But at that time he couldn't move, he couldn't even say anything to remind her. He could only watch as she walked away. The only thing he could do was to desperately recover himself and regain his ability to move, so that he could protect her by his side. He couldn't let her get hurt again. Afraid that Xuema's breath would attract the wolves to attack her, he simply released the breath of his blood. His blood was an irresistible delicacy to the wolves, or to any animal. Sure enough, not long after the scent of his blood was released, the wolf souls in the ghost face tree were awakened, and the first group of wolves appeared to attack him. There was a certain number of wolves in this forest. Only when the first batch of wolves was greatly reduced would the second batch of wolves be triggered to escape from the wolf soul tree, forever maintaining a delicate balance. He thought that by attracting the wolves to him she would be safer. But he didn't expect that she would disregard everything and come back. She did not rely solely on her psychokinesis to kill the pack of wolves. Instead, she relied on her quick reflexes and the ability to break the formation, as well as her magical footwork. This girl's performance was even better than his disciple who possessed Earth Realm psychokinesis. When the little Qilin fell, she didn't care about the pack of wolves behind her and pulled him away in the nick of time. Compared to her own body, she was very petite and exquisite. Unexpectedly, the petite Xuema was able to carry him quite easily. While she was dragging him, she saw the wound on his back and sucked in a mouthful of cold air. While he was avoiding the little Qilin's Mount Tai smash, he clearly heard Xuema whisper in his ear, "I'm sorry." These 3 short words warmed his heart quite a bit. Chapter 747. Now that he heard Xuema apologize, Di Zun looked at her with an unfathomable gaze. Ning Xuema felt her scalp tingle under his gaze. Under his gaze, there seemed to be an ambiguous feeling lingering around him. She blinked her eyes. Now was not the time to think about these messy things. She looked at Di Zun, who was injured and unable to move, and thought about the current situation. It was not realistic to carry him on her back and run away. Otherwise, once they were surrounded by wolves, she would be helpless and unable to kill them. She glanced at Kirin, who was not far away, and clapped her hands. "Got it?" She immediately summoned Kirin. A moment later, Kirin broke through the wolves' encirclement and ran back. It was probably the first time that Di Zun had fought so hard. His eyes were bloodshot, and his whole body was filled with a murderous aura. "Master, what's the matter?" Although it had suffered some injuries, it had still bitten and killed many wolves. When Dizun had rushed over, he wanted to fight with the alpha wolf. However, the alpha wolf was very cunning. It hid behind the wolves and howled to command the other wolves to fight with Dizun. Dizun could not rush over at all. After all, Dizun was a mythological beast. His blood was domineering. Dizun had not encountered any real danger before, but now that he was in such a situation, the wild nature in his body was stimulated. It was the first time in his life that he was able to kill so many enemies to his heart's content. After such a fight, Kirin seemed to have changed a little. Of course, Ning Xuema did not notice these changes at the moment. When she saw Kirin coming back, she did not say anything. She picked up Dizun and put him on Dizun's back. She quickly ordered, "We have to break out of the encirclement. You take Dizun and I'll stay behind." Kirin was obviously not satisfied. A mythological beast was bitten by wolves. It's too shameful. Dizun looked at Ning Xuema's face and added, "Besides, once we run away they will chase after us. It's better to stay here and fight with them." Ning Xuema frowned. She seemed to have spoiled Kirin too much. Dizun did not know that sometimes he had to obey orders from a superior. Instead of refuting and asking why, when she was the boss of the Secret Service, her subordinates had always carried out her orders unconditionally and swiftly. They had never questioned the orders of their superiors or tried to refute them. One had to know that the situation on the battlefield was constantly changing. It was impossible for the commander to explain every order to his subordinates. As the saying went, military orders were like mountains. As a subordinate, he had to carry them out regardless of whether he understood them or not. Ever since she came to this continent, she and Kirin had been relying on each other for survival. Kirin looked so cute that she unknowingly kept it as a pet. In such an emergency, it was like a curious baby asking why. "Little apple, do as I say." Ning Xuema's face darkened. But Kirin still wanted to refute, but he suddenly saw Ning Xuema's expression and was shocked. Once Ning Xuema's face sank, he actually had the aura of a king. "Okay." Kirin remembered that he had messed up several times and finally stopped asking. Dizun agreed and turned around to run. Once Dizun started running, it was like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves. In the blink of an eye, Dizun had run dozens of feet away. He did not forget to say proudly, "Dizun, I can run very fast. I can definitely shake them off." Chapter 748. As Kirin was running, it felt that something was wrong, so it turned around to look. Dizun was pinched. Dizun, who was supposed to be riding on its back, was nowhere to be seen. "Bastard Kirin. Get back here." Ning Xuema's angry scolding came from its head. Kirin was stunned. It was the first time that Ning Xuema had scolded it like that. Obviously, it had really pissed her off. It hurriedly looked to the back and saw that Ning Xuema was surrounded by the wolves. Through the gaps between the wolves, it could faintly see a corner of white clothes. God. It had forgotten that Dizun was seriously injured, so he could barely sit on its back. Due to its sudden movement, Dizun fell off its back. If Ning Xuema hadn't rushed over and protected Dizun, it was afraid that it would have been bitten several times by the wolves. Kirin hurriedly ran back, tearing and biting a bloody path, and once again rushed into the encirclement. Dizun was indeed sitting there, and his lips were even paler. Obviously, the fall just now had worsened his injuries. The little Qilin tucked its tail between its legs, not daring to look into Ning Xuema's eyes that were burning with anger. It immediately rushed to the ancestor, picked him up with its mouth and threw him on its back. "Ancestor, sit tight. This time I will definitely run steadily. Grow bigger," Dizun said. Although his voice was weak, it was also very determined. He was already so weak, but there was still a kind of pressure on his body, so Kirin didn't dare to disobey. While muttering, "If my body is too big, it's not suitable for running in the jungle," it still grew 2 times bigger. Originally, its body was like a little pony, but now it was like an adult horse. Dizun stretched out his hand to Ning Xuema, who was still fighting among the wolves, and said, "Come up." Ning Xuema was naturally very smart, so she immediately understood what he meant. Dizun was afraid that he couldn't sit on Kirin, so he wanted her to protect him from behind. "That's good." Ning Xuema killed a wild wolf and leaped onto Kirin's back, sitting right behind Dizun. Ignoring the bloodstains on the ancestor's back, she stretched out her left arm and wrapped it around his waist. "Don't worry, I'm here. This way you won't fall down." His right hand was still madly waving the wolf soul tree branch, blocking the wolf's attack. Dizun's body stiffened slightly. He lowered his eyes and looked at Ning Xuema's small hand that was holding him. A strange light flashed through his eyes. He had lived for so many years and he had always been the one protecting others. He had always been the one being treated as a powerful backer. This was the first time a woman had hugged him with her delicate arms and told him that she would protect him. This feeling of being protected, it seemed pretty good too. Dizun was very satisfied. He took advantage of the situation to lean into Ning Xuema's arms and snorted. Although his voice was weak, it was still extremely magnetic. Ning Xuema didn't know what to say. Fortunately, she was quite strong now. If she was an ordinary woman, she would have been directly pushed off Kirin's back by such a big man. However, he was really weak now, so weak that he couldn't even sit on Kirin's back. It seemed that leaning in her arms was safer. At this time, Ning Xuema didn't have time to think about other things. She still had to deal with the wolves that would jump over and bite them from time to time. Fortunately, Kirin was very reliable this time. It ran fast and steadily. Every time it made a sharp turn or jumped over a tree, it would remind them so that the two people on its back wouldn't accidentally fall down. Chapter 749. Kirin had never seen such a fragile Dizun before, and it was afraid that it wouldn't be able to afford the compensation if Dizun was injured. For the little Qilin, a distance of 15 kilometers was nothing. Furthermore, Ning Xuema was protecting it from behind. Thus, the journey was more daunting than dangerous. When it came to running, the wolves were not as fast as Kirin. At first, they could still attack in groups of 3 or 5, but gradually, the distance between them gradually increased. Ning Xuema's sense of direction was not ordinary, so when she commanded the little Qilin, it didn't go astray at all. In less than 10 minutes, Kirin carried the two of them out of the strange forest, and a large body of water appeared in front of them. Kirin cheered, "It's so beautiful." Ning Xuema had been paying attention to the movements behind her, but when she heard Kirin's shout, she looked forward and her eyes lit up. In the deep blue lake water, there were many green lotus flowers standing gracefully in the lake. Pink lotus flowers could be seen everywhere, but how many people had seen green lotus flowers before? These lotus flowers were as big as bowls and green as if they were carved out of jade. Every petal was sparkling and translucent, and they covered the entire body of water. Every lotus flower had a circle of faint white light, as if it was covered with a layer of Buddha's light. No wonder it was called Buddha Lotus Lake, it was indeed a worthy name. The wolves behind them chased after them. "Jump on it and walk according to the Chiman technique," Dizun said, his voice seemed to be weaker. Chiman technique? Kirin was confused. It didn't know how to do that. Moreover, these lotus flowers looked so fragile and translucent, as if a strong breath could blow them away and melt them. Could such a delicate lotus flower bear its huge weight? Moreover, it was carrying two people on its back. If they stepped on it, it would not only be difficult to destroy the flowers, but they would also fall into the water immediately. Fortunately, Ning Xuema knew the Chiman technique, and she knew that Dizun must have his reasons for saying so. At this time he couldn't fool her and Kirin. Therefore he immediately instructed Kirin to choose which lotus flowers to jump. The little Qilin thought that at worst he would just fall into the water. Following Ning Xuema's instructions, he jumped towards the lotus flowers. When the little Qilin stepped on it, it felt that although it was a soft flower, it didn't have the slightest intention of shaking. When it stepped on it, there was even a trace of ice-cold aura drilling into the soles of its feet, making it exceptionally comfortable. These lotuses had such strong spiritual energy. Kirin's eyes lit up. Without any hesitation, he followed Ning Xuema's instructions step by step. When it was about 70 to 80 feet away, it heard a thumping sound behind it. When it heard the sound, it turned around. It turned out that the pack of wolves that were chasing after them were unwilling to let the delicacy in their mouths escape just like that. They actually wanted to step on the Buddhist lotus and chase after them. However, for some reason, the lotuses suddenly softened when the wolf stepped on them. With a casual shake, the wolf was swayed into the lake. The lake water looked sparkling and translucent, and it was incomparably sweet. However, when the wolves fell in, it was like falling into sulfuric acid. After letting out half a miserable howl, they melted into the water, and not even a strand of fur was left. When the other wolves saw this, they didn't dare to chase after them anymore. They just stood on the shore and howled at the two people and the beast. Kirin was proud and also howled back. Only then did it continue to follow Ning Xuema's instructions and go deeper into the lake. Gradually, the pack of wolves on the shore lost all hope and slowly dispersed. At this time, Ning Xuema finally heaved a sigh of relief. It was only at this moment that she was able to calm down and secretly check on the ancestor's injuries. She secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. Chapter 750. There were several wounds on the ancestor's back that were obviously caused by the wolf spirit tree's branches. His flesh was badly mutilated and it was a ghastly sight. It turned out that the great god could also be injured, and such a serious injury. The ancestor's injuries were caused by protecting her, but what kind of shameful thing did she do just now? Leaving him like this and running away alone? I'm sorry. She sighed and sincerely apologized. The ancestor's body slightly stiffened. He could feel her fingers lightly touching his back. Her fingertips were warm, and wherever they touched, there seemed to be a warm current flowing into his body, causing his mind to slightly tremble. It seemed that the injuries on his back didn't hurt as much. Shuema? He called out to her, turned around and raised his arm to hold her hand. Ning Shuema was startled. She subconsciously withdrew her hand. She didn't know why, but she subconsciously knew that she couldn't get too close to him. Her rejection made the ancestor's movements slightly pause. The pair of black eyes behind the mask looked at her, but he didn't say anything. The atmosphere between the two was slightly strange. Ning Shuema lightly coughed and said indifferently, "Ancestor, I think we need to find a quiet place. Your injuries need to be treated." The ancestor looked at her for a moment and then said, "N." After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Kirin finally reached the end of those Buddhist lotuses. At the end of the lotuses there were light-colored jellyfish-like things. These jellyfish had a layer of faint fluorescent light on their bodies. They were constantly swimming on the surface of the water, constantly changing patterns, and were extremely beautiful. Kirin was about to step on them when the ancestor shouted, "Wait!" Kirin hurriedly retracted her hooves, but because she was in too much of a hurry, her body swayed, and the two people on her body almost fell into the water. "Help me down," the ancestor said in a low voice. "Kirin can't go through this place." Ning Shuema naturally helped him down. Under their feet were soft green Buddhist lotuses. Wisps of light surged towards their feet and surrounded them. The ancestor didn't feel anything, but Ning Shuema felt inexplicably irritated. The Buddhist lotus under her feet gave her an impulse to ruthlessly crush it. She suppressed her discomfort and looked at the beautiful jellyfish. What should we do next? Half of the ancestor's body was almost leaning on her body. His voice was a little hoarse and deep, "Only I can go through this place." For some reason, Ning Shuema heaved a sigh of relief when she heard his words. "That's good. In that case please go over by yourself. Kirin and I will wait here." As she had expected, the place where these jellyfish were heading should be the place where Dizun was recovering. It was a secret place. The more secrets one knew, the faster one would die. Ning Shuema knew this very well. Besides, she wasn't interested anyway. Now was a good time to leave. Her wishful thinking was ruthlessly broken by the ancestor. "You must come with me." "Why?" Ning Shuema widened her eyes. "My injury. Don't tell me you don't want to take care of me again?" The ancestor's black eyes seemed to be a little hurt. Hearing his words, Ning Shuema felt a bit guilty and paused for a moment. "But didn't you say that only you can enter this place?" Before she finished speaking, her waist was suddenly tightened. She was unexpectedly picked up by the ancestor. "I'll carry you there." The ancestor turned his head and said to Kirin, "You can wait here or you can go to the dark forest to gain experience." Chapter 751. Remember, the beasts here fight based on their real abilities. They are not bound by any rules in this world. If you can't beat them, just come to the Buddha Lotus Lake. Kirin was very pleased with the Dizun's words. Kirin's eyes lit up. What it lacked now was training itself. Usually, the beasts would run away when they saw it, so it couldn't even find an opponent to fight with. But here it didn't have to worry about that at all. There were many stupid wolves here, so they weren't afraid of it, the king of all beasts. It could fight to its heart's content here. It also wanted to become stronger. It didn't want to scare away other beasts with its identity. The little Qilin turned around and ran back the way it came, rushing straight into the dark forest. "Wolves, I'm back." Ning Shuema was speechless. She was caught off guard and fell into his arms. At this moment she couldn't help but struggle. Wasn't he so weak that he couldn't stand? How could he still have the strength to hug her? Was he pretending to be weak just now? Ning Shuema was angry that she had been fooled. Her struggle made his body sway again. It seemed that he couldn't stand still and fell on the Buddha Lotus Lake. Half of his body was submerged in the water. When he fell down he was probably afraid of drowning her. Even though he was clearly in a forward position, he abruptly twisted his body backwards. Ning Xuema directly laid in his embrace. Not a single drop of water came into contact with her. Ning Xuema was speechless. Under the mask, his lips were shockingly pale. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She quickly jumped to the side and helped him up. "Are you okay?" The ancestor was drenched in water. Even the tips of his hair were dripping with water. The water droplets flowed down his white jade mask and dripped into his tightly buttoned lapel. There was a kind of soul-stirring beauty about him. Ning Xuema couldn't quite wrap her head around the fact that someone who had always been incomparably strong had become so weak. After he stood up, he was a little shaky. Ning Xuema was shocked, especially the injury on his back. It seemed that the fall just now had made it worse. Drops of blood were flowing out one by one. Ning Xuema could not help but support him from the side, allowing half of his body to lean on her. There was a strange fragrance on the ancestor's body. It smelled like herbs and flowers. She had noticed it when she was running for her life, but now that she had calmed down, the fragrance was even more obvious. Smelling this aroma, her emotions were strangely stirred, as if some kind of appetite had been aroused. She had the urge to bite him. Xuema herself was shocked by this sudden impulse. She pursed her lips and held her breath. Why did he have such a strange impulse? "You haven't eaten. Are you hungry?" She suddenly thought of a more reliable idea. "Dizun, I can treat the wounds on your back. After I'm done you can—" Before she could finish her sentence, her body suddenly tightened and then lightened. She was once again lifted into the air by the ancestor. "Ning Xuema, be good and don't move." The ancestor opened his mouth and walked step by step toward the jellyfish with her in his arms. This time, Ning Xuema really didn't dare to move. Her body was stiff in his arms and even her breathing was light. She was afraid that she would press him down again. It was strange. The jellyfish were swimming back and forth in the water, leisurely. However, as soon as the ancestor put his foot on them, their bodies immediately spread out and connected with each other, forming a light-colored passage. As soon as the ancestor's foot left, the jellyfish behind him spread out again like before. Chapter 752. The scene looked beautiful, but Ning Xuema was very nervous at the moment. How could she be in the mood to enjoy the scenery? She looked at the Dizun's face from time to time, fearing that he would pass out. Although the Dizun was very weak, he was swaying with every step. Ning Xuema's heart was also swaying. Fortunately, he was holding her firmly and didn't have the slightest intention to throw her away. Ning Xuema's body was stiff. In fact, she was ready to jump to the ground and hug him if he couldn't hold her. However, the Dizun didn't give her this opportunity. He carried Xuema and walked for about 100 steps on the jellyfish road. In front of them appeared an oversized jellyfish. No, it was an oversized jellyfish-like house. The house looked transparent from afar like a crystal, but they couldn't see anything inside. It was as beautiful as a fairy tale castle. Ning Xuema didn't expect to see such a house in such a place. When she saw it, she was a little stunned. The style of this castle didn't look like the work of the Dizun. So fairy tale, so dreamy. Could it be that the Dizun's illegitimate daughter lived in it? She was shocked by her own thoughts. How could a person like the Dizun have an illegitimate daughter? He didn't even have a decent lover. There was a crystal-like platform in front of the jellyfish-like castle. The Dizun held her and walked to the platform. He shook violently and was about to fall to one side. Fortunately, Ning Xuema was prepared this time. She immediately did a somersault and jumped to the ground. Then, like lightning, she used her shoulder to support the ancestor's falling body. She knew it would be like this. When people were seriously injured, they usually relied on their last breath to do anything. Once they reached the destination, they would definitely fall down. It worked every time. The Dizun was so weak that he couldn't be supported. Ning Xuema used half of her body to support him, but he still wanted to slip down. Ning Xuema had no choice but to bend down and carry him up. The ancestor was tall and big. Now that he was being carried like a princess, his long arms and legs almost drooped to the ground. "Ancestor, are you all right?" Ning Xuema carried him up the steps and arrived in front of the castle gate. The gate of the castle was sky blue and translucent, with a faint pearl light flowing on it. It was so beautiful that it was like a dream. Ning Xuema was shocked. The jellyfish-like castle and the shell-like door gave her a familiar yet strange feeling. Perhaps she had seen such a dreamy place in her childhood dreams? "Go in." The ancestor spat out these two words softly, his lips turning even paler. At this time, Ning Xuema didn't have time to study the unbelievably beautiful door. She kicked the door open and carried him in. The sky was like a dome enveloping the surroundings. Ning Xuema knew that the layout of the castle should be very dreamy, but she didn't expect it to be this dreamy. The ceiling was transparent like glass and was semicircular. When he looked up, he could see the deep blue sky outside. In the dark forest, the sky was always covered by clouds and fog, but here he could see the real sky clearly. The sky was dark blue and there were a few white clouds floating. The reflection of the white clouds even reflected on the dark blue floor. They floated slowly as if the sky and the world were one. Walking in the castle made people feel as if they were walking in the sky, free and unfettered among the white clouds. There was only one hall in the castle, which looked like a dreamy sky. The most conspicuous thing in the hall was a big bed. Chapter 753. The bed was shaped like an oversized cloud. It didn't have the bed curtains that were commonly seen in this era. From afar it looked like a cloud. In the middle of the hall, there was a luminous pearl the size of a small moon, faintly emitting light. Half of the luminous pearl was shining and the other half was not. From afar it really looked like a round jade plate. There were other decorations around, and those decorations also looked like clouds of various sizes. They stood there quietly as if they had been there for thousands of years. When Ning Xuema walked into the castle with the Dizun in her arms, she felt as if she had walked into the vast sky. Surrounding them were floating white clouds, and there was also a round crescent moon shining brightly. The crescent moon, the small boat has two sharp ends. I am sitting on the crescent boat, holding the moon and playing on the swing. This was a children's song that Ning Xuema had read when she was a child. She had always thought that it was the most fairy tale fantasy in the poet's heart. She had never thought that she would see such a real thing here. It made her almost suspect that she was in a dream. Her heart felt warm and there was also an indescribable feeling of sourness. Go to the bed. The Dizun in her arms said 3 words. Why does the sentence sound so ambiguous? Ning Xuema couldn't help but feel speechless while holding the Dizun. She didn't have time to think about it. She walked over and put him on the cloud bed. The bed looked like a soft cloud, but the bed was still very hard. There was no bedding on it, only a white bed board. After putting the Dizun down, Ning Xuema couldn't help but touch the bed. It was cold to the touch like ice. It turned out that the bed that looked so warm was actually so cold. Could it be the legendary frost jade bed? There was a faint white air lingering on the bed. The Dizun was sitting on the bed like a god sitting upright in the clouds. Ning Xuema was in a daze for a moment. Didn't you want to treat the injury on my back? The Dizun called her back from her daze. Ah yes. Ning Xuema finally remembered her mission. After thinking for a while, she also jumped on the bed. She shivered as soon as she got on. It was really cold. This bed was really cold. As soon as her feet stepped on the ground, she felt a sharp chill shoot up from the soles of her feet, instantly spreading throughout her body, making her feel as if the blood in her body was almost frozen. Her rosy little face instantly turned pale. Get down? The ancestor spat out 2 words. His voice was as calm as flowing water, but it was unquestionable. Ning Xuema. He didn't allow anyone else to sleep on his bed? Tsk, did he think she was willing to be on top? Without another word, she jumped off the bed. When her feet touched the floor again, the bone-piercing cold finally disappeared. However, the bone-piercing cold was still there, causing her to shiver a few more times. Great wisdom mental cultivation method. The ancestor spoke again. Ning Xuema's heart moved slightly. The mental cultivation method that he mentioned was the one that she had just learned from that book. She hadn't used it much yet. Hearing him mention it at this time, she immediately lowered her eyes and began to circulate this Heart Sutra. Speaking of which, it was strange. After circulating this Heart Sutra for a short while, the bone-piercing cold seemed to be driven away by something in her body and retreated. After a moment, her body returned to normal, and her little face regained its rosy color. It turned out that the reason why he asked her to get off the bed was not because he didn't allow her to sleep on the bed, but because her body was not strong enough to sleep on the bed. Ning Xuema's displeasure lessened a little. She raised her head to look at the ancestor and was shocked. Chapter 754. The ancestor was sitting on the edge of the bed with his back to her. His outer robe and inner robe were slowly taken off from his shoulders, layer by layer, like a cloud, slowly revealing his skin that was as firm as the moonlight, and the smooth lines of his shoulder blades. His clothes slid down to his waist, and finally, his entire back was exposed. Ning Xuema was speechless. She almost held her breath. When Di Zun was wearing clothes, it was not enough to describe his beauty. She had hugged his waist before, so she knew that his waist was thin and felt good when hugging it. At that time, Xuema knew that his figure was definitely excellent. But his usual image was too high, so it was hard to imagine what he looked like when he was naked. He was like a high and mighty god, and people could only bow down and worship him. Who would want to take a look at a god naked? Even thinking about it felt like blasphemy. Because of this, even though Ning Xuema had a few brief moments of physical contact with him, she never imagined what his body would look like. She knew that his body must be very good-looking, but she did not expect it to be so good. Perfect. At this moment she could only think of this word. She had never thought that a man's back could be so beautiful. A little bit more would make her fat, a little less would make her skinny, a little whiter would make her pale, and a little darker would make her blemish. His skin was like moonlight, like satin, like jade. Every inch of it was like God's most satisfied masterpiece. It made people unable to move their eyes away. Although it was said that all beautiful appearances were false, people had the nature to appreciate beauty and chase after beauty. When you see something extremely beautiful, you can't help but take a few more glances. Just like when we are walking on the street, if we suddenly see a beautiful woman or a handsome man, we can't help but chase after them with our eyes. It was not necessarily about gender, but the instinct to chase after beauty. As a secret agent, Ning Xuema had received all kinds of training. One of them was that she would not be fascinated by any beautiful things, so as to avoid being greedy and messing up the plan. Therefore, people like her didn't care about appearances. She had met countless handsome men and beautiful women since she transmigrated, but she had never been fascinated by their appearances. At most, she would look at them from a purely admiring point of view. However, this time, Ning Xuema saw Di Zun's naked back and could not move her eyes away. Her eyes were fixed on his back, on those wounds. There were 3 wounds that were not very long but extremely deep. To be exact, there were 3 broken branches of the ghost-face tree that pierced into his back. The broken branches were still embedded in his back, blocking the wounds. There was an iron-gray luster around the broken branches and blood was seeping out. These 3 wounds on such a perfect back were simply like 3 annoying flaws on a piece of top-grade jade, making people want to use violence to erase those flaws and restore it to its original state. Ning Xuema's eyes stared fixedly at the 3 wounds. For a moment she did not make any movements. Although Di Zun's back was facing her, he could feel her gaze on his back, his thin lips slightly raised. Rangyue Shenlin said that women also liked beauty. When necessary, the temptation of beauty could be a good way to win the heart of a beauty. In fact, Di Zun did not agree with Rangyue Shenlin's words. Now it seemed that Rangyue Shenlin was right. Women were also easily fascinated by beauty. Chapter 755. Although he had no choice but to show his naked back at this time, if he could charm Xuema at the same time, it would also be a gain. A moment, a minute, 2 minutes. The Di Zun sat on the bed with his back exposed and did not rush her. The longer she charmed him, the more effective it would be. But wasn't she staring at him for a little too long? 5 minutes had passed, but she still hadn't come back to her senses. The Di Zun's lips curved into a perfect arc under the mask. He said, "Didn't you want to treat me?" Although his voice was still light, there was a touch of gentleness. The Di Zun, can you feel how deep these 3 broken branches are? How long are they inside? Which organs are hurt? Look at the positions of these 3 broken branches. The top one is in the left atrium of the heart, the middle one is in the spleen, and the bottom one is in the left kidney. Ning Xuema spoke in a professional doctor's tone, and then a series of professional terms. She had been lost in thought for a long time, not because she was charmed by his naked back, but because she was calculating how his wounds might have hurt his organs. How should she treat them? The Di Zun's back stiffened, and the smile on his lips unknowingly disappeared. The Di Zun, you should be able to feel how deep these broken branches are, right? Ning Xuema had said so much in one breath, but she didn't hear any response from him. She was a little puzzled, so she asked again. You won't faint, will you? The Di Zun had his back to her, so she couldn't see his facial expression. But even if he was facing her, she couldn't see it, right? After all, he was wearing a mask. She only saw him take a deep breath and finally say, "No." These 2 words were stiff. He paused and then added a few more words. As for how deep the branches are, how many patients know? Are you pretending to be a miracle doctor? Observe for yourself. You seem to be in a bad temper. Well, no one would be in a good mood after suffering such a serious injury. It was so painful. Ning Xuema was determined not to argue with him. Once she entered the doctor mode, she wouldn't care about anything else. She began to listen to his breathing, his heartbeat, and the color of his injured skin to determine how much the branches had pierced into his body. Di Zun's medical skills were also very good. Although he didn't look back, he could sense Ning Xuema's movements and determine what she was doing. A moment later, he said faintly, "A doctor is particular about looking, listening, questioning, and feeling the pulse. Do you want to observe my complexion?" A large part of observing a person's complexion was to look at his face, tongue coating, and so on. However, he was wearing a cold jade mask. How could she tell? She had heard that when the ancestor appeared, he never took off his mask. Even his disciple didn't know what he looked like. Of course, at this time he wouldn't take off his mask and let her see his face, right? Just as Xuema finished her thought, the ancestor, who had his back to her, suddenly turned around slowly. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but take 2 steps back. He had already taken off his mask. It had already been plucked. She revealed an astonishingly beautiful yet astonishingly cold pair of eyes. Ning Xuema was very familiar with this face, so familiar that she couldn't pretend that she didn't know it. Han Shangyue. It was Han Shanyue's face. His facial features were definitely his, but compared to when he was Han Shangyue, he was much more three-dimensional and handsome. Compared to when he was Han Shangyue, it was also a grade higher. Chapter 756. Han Shanyue's facial features were already extremely beautiful, but after he regained his identity, his facial features were indescribable. Even his eyelashes were so beautiful, making people feel excited just by looking at them. Because of his injuries, his lips were pale as if they were carved out of ice and snow, and would melt with a gentle breeze. He was the most powerful man in the world, the god worshipped by the continent. No one had ever seen his face, but now he let Xuema see it. She saw it. Ning Xuema was not happy, only shocked. She was on guard. The more secrets one knew, the faster one would die. This was something that everyone knew. Therefore, the less one knew about the secrets of the gods, the safer one would be. Usually, when a god revealed all his secrets in front of someone, it meant that he wanted to kill that person. Ning Xuema did not know what expression to use to face him. She took a step back and felt unsafe, so she took another step back. The Di Zun's eyes fell on her face, and he saw that she was obviously on guard. He was slightly stunned. Did she really lose her memory? Did she forget about Han Shangyue? Playing the pipa song she played in the Imperial Garden at the White Tower was the first step to admitting his identity. He thought that Xuema would expose his identity at that time. Unexpectedly, she did not. She treated him like a stranger, polite and distant, as if she did not recognize him at all. Now that he had taken off his mask and revealed his true face, was she still going to act dumb? Ning Xuema was stunned for a moment, and countless thoughts flashed through her mind. Finally, she took a deep breath and took 2 steps forward under his gaze. Her eyes kept looking at his face as if she was really looking at his complexion. She said, "Your face and lips are pale, you must have lost a lot of blood." She began to talk about some professional terms, and based on his complexion and the signs of his organs, she guessed his injuries. The Di Zun pursed his lips tightly. This little bastard was so professional. Did she recognize him or not? Did she really lose her memory, or was her disguise too good? From Xuema's words and actions, he could not see her true thoughts at all. He was so angry that he almost wanted to reach out and read her memories to see what she was thinking. However, he thought of something and held himself back. Back then, in order to obtain information on Shui Yilan, he had forcibly read her memories. As a result, she had flown into a rage and looked very hurt. So he couldn't do that anymore. His coat had been taken off, and his robe was folded about his waist. When he turned around just now, Ning Xuema's gaze was fixed on his face without the mask. Now that he stretched out his arm, she finally noticed his front. His heart skipped a beat. His shoulders, his neck, his collarbone, his chest, his abdomen, his waist, they were all in her line of sight. That perfect line impacted the senses of a person's vision, making Ning Xuema, who had undergone special training, feel her heart madly beat a few times. A person's beauty wasn't considered too heaven-defying. What was heaven-defying was that from the tip of his hair to the soles of his feet, there wasn't a single spot that wasn't perfect. It was as if she had gathered the essence of all the beauty in the world. Ning Xuema couldn't help but sigh in her heart. The God who created him must be his own father. She loved him so much that it was in her bones. She almost suspected that if this person's flesh and blood were removed, his skeleton would also be shockingly beautiful. No wonder he didn't care about all the beauties in the world. Chapter 757. No wonder he didn't care about all the beauties in the world. He was already so beautiful, so what kind of beauty could catch his eye? If he wanted to see a beauty, he could just look at himself in the mirror. This was really challenging the limits of her psychological endurance. Therefore, Ning Xuema's gaze decisively shifted upwards. Stare at his mouth? His lips were too beautiful. Stare at his eyes? His eyes were too deep. She felt like she was going to drown in them. Finally, Ning Xuema's gaze landed on his hair. Although his hair was also as smooth as satin, she was often bombarded by shampoo advertisements, so his hair wasn't that impactful. She was looking for a suitable position for her eyes when he suddenly stretched his hand in front of her eyes. His jade-like fingers made her want to play with them. Take his pulse? Yes, she should take his pulse. Ning Xuema subconsciously placed her hand on his wrist, wanting to check his pulse. However, she didn't expect that just as her fingers touched his wrist, he would suddenly flip his wrist. Like lightning, he grabbed her wrist and abruptly pulled her into his embrace. Although Ning Xuema was caught off guard, her martial arts were pretty good now. When he pulled her, she subconsciously took a step back. Dizun was still seriously injured and didn't have enough strength to pull her over. Instead, he was pulled off the bed by Xuema. He directly pounced on Ning Xuema. Plop. This time, Ning Xuema became his meat cushion and was pressed to the ground by him. She didn't know if it was a coincidence or if he did it on purpose, but when he pressed her down, his lips were pressed against Xuema's lips. His body's aura completely enveloped her. Ning Xuema widened her eyes to see his deep blue eyes that were just inches away from her. Ning Xuema's brain went blank for a moment. She looked at him and couldn't react in time. His eyes flashed slightly and his body moved slightly. He opened his mouth and sucked on her lips. His lips were dry and hot. The moment he sucked on her lips, Ning Xuema's heart suddenly jumped. She felt dizzy. At the same time, she didn't know why, but there was a sense of rejection in the depths of her heart. It was this inexplicable rejection that pulled her back from her daze. She suddenly woke up and pushed him. In her nervousness, she used a little more strength. He was pushed over and rolled off her body. He fell to the ground with a plop and lay there on his back. Ning Xuema jumped up and lowered her head to look at him. She saw that his eyebrows were deeply furrowed. His pair of eyes seemed to be looking at her, yet they also seemed to be lifeless. His lips opened and closed. Xuema, do you not recognize me? His voice was a little hoarse, as if he was at a loss. Ning Xuema's heart felt as if it had been struck by a sledgehammer. She stared at him. What? He didn't say, "Hey Han Shangyue?" Ning Xuema called out the name that had been hovering in her mouth ever since she saw him. Her voice was trembling. Don't sleep. Say it clearly. He didn't move. His eyebrows were tightly knitted as if he was enduring some kind of pain. Ning Xuema finally remembered his injuries and abruptly jumped up in shock. Damn it. There were still 3 iron-like branches stuck in his back. She didn't know if her push just now had shaken his injury. At this time, she didn't have time to think about anything else. She quickly went forward and carried him back to the cloud bed and let him lie there. Chapter 758. Ning Xuema checked the wound on the Dizun's back. She couldn't help but touch her forehead. The 3 branches had pierced even deeper. Just a moment ago they were still a little exposed, but now they had completely sunk into his flesh. She walked around in a circle. She had to get the branches out of his wound, but now she was empty-handed. She couldn't find any of the surgical instruments she had prepared. Without a scalpel or other surgical instruments, how could she get the branches out of his wound? She quickly searched around the castle and actually found a kitchen knife and a boning knife in a small room that was partitioned out like a storage room. These 2 things were originally sealed in a rotten wooden box. Apparently they had been shelved for too long. There was a thick layer of dust on them. She brushed the dust away and revealed the blade. Ning Xuema's eyes lit up. These 2 household items were actually made of millennium cold iron. Not only were they extremely sharp, but they also never rusted. With these 2 things, it wouldn't be difficult to perform the operation. Ning Xuema had already speculated that the Dizun should have injured his heart meridian based on his complexion and pulse. Among the 3 wounds, the uppermost one was the most dangerous, while the other 2 were only superficial wounds. In Ning Xuema's mind, the Dizun should be so strong that he should be invulnerable. It was hard to imagine that he could be injured like this by these branches. She had the surgical instruments, but she didn't have any antiseptic gauze or medicine. The Dizun might have some on him, but he couldn't take them out if he didn't wake up. Shuema didn't give up and called him a few more times. She even poked the Dizun's palm with the jade hairpin on her head, but he still didn't wake up. Helpless, she had to take the risk and perform the operation. In order to prevent him from waking up halfway through the operation, she simply pressed a few more acupoints to make him more unconscious. The conditions here were very simple, so Ning Shuema kept everything simple. First, she washed his back with water and then roasted the 2 knives with fire. Then, she disinfected them with fire and began the operation. Finally, she managed to pull out 2 bloody branches from the ground. Their length gave Ning Shuema a fright. The shortest of these 2 branches was half a foot long. When he pulled them out, blood gushed out from the wounds. Fortunately, Ning Shuema knew how to stop the bleeding by pressing acupoints. She quickly treated his wound. Because there was no medicine, she could only use the rejuvenation technique that she had just learned to clean the wound. Then she tore a piece of her dress and bandaged the wound. It took Ning Shuema a lot of effort to pull out the topmost branch. After all, this branch was blocking the heart meridian. If she was careless, she could cut it off and he would never wake up again. Shuema carefully pried open the flesh around him. When a small section of the branch was exposed, she pinched it with her fingers and pulled it out bit by bit. When he was pulling out the root, he had a slight reaction. His body moved slightly. Ning Shuema quickly gave him a few more pokes. She wanted to knock him out again so that he wouldn't jump up halfway. However, she didn't expect that before her fingers could touch the ancestor's skin, they would be bounced off by a faint white light. Under the extreme pain, his body finally activated the protective barrier automatically. Ning Shuema. She had only pulled out a little bit of the topmost branch. Seeing that he was frowning slightly and was about to turn over, Ning Shuema was anxious. She rushed over and hugged him across the barrier. "Don't move. Don't move. I'll treat you again. Remove the protective barrier. Come remove it. I won't hurt you." Chapter 759. The ancestor's body slightly stiffened and he actually stopped moving. The protective barrier around his body also slowly disappeared. Ning Shuema stared at him blankly, and there was an indescribable feeling in her heart. She felt touched and warm at the same time. People like the ancestor were used to being high and mighty. He had lived for thousands of years, and who knew how much deception and blood he had experienced. People like him wouldn't easily trust anyone. This was especially true when he was seriously injured. His current state of mind was clearly not clear, yet Shuema was able to remove the barrier protecting his body with just a few words. This showed that in his subconscious mind he still believed in her. He believed that she wouldn't harm him. Naturally, this wasn't the time to let her imagination run wild, so Ning Shuema calmed down and immediately began to treat the last wound. After half an hour, she finally pulled out the branch little by little. Its length made her extremely shocked. It was almost 7 inches long. It was inserted from his back. According to this length, this thing should have pierced his heart. If a normal person was hit like this, they would have died long ago. Fortunately, he was the ancestor. He had already cultivated to become an immortal, right? That was why he could follow her for so long after his heart was pierced, and even carry her to this illusory castle. She looked at the end of the branch that had pierced his flesh. The tip was sharp and the color was a little strange. It faintly emitted a charming purple color, and even emitted a faint fluorescent light. What was going on? She knew that this branch was poisonous, so when she pulled it out, she used a snow-white handkerchief as a cushion. However, this poison shouldn't have much effect on the ancestor, because when she pulled out the 2 branches, she didn't find any abnormalities. The color of the blood flowing out of his body was also normal. Why was the tip of the last branch so strange? Ning Shuema was still worried, so she put the tip of the branch close to her nose and smelled it. A kind of fishy sweet fragrance like medicine and flowers seeped into her nose. Heavens! The smell. It smells so good. Ning Shuema had never smelled this fragrance before. She had never smelled such a nice fragrance in her entire life. It was as if a small hand had reached out from the fragrance and pinched her stomach. An indescribable taste rose from her dantian. It was as if there was a starving child jumping around and shouting, causing her to salivate in an instant. She wished she could chew up the blood-stained stick in her hand and eat it. This feeling came so suddenly that she couldn't help but bring the branch closer to her lips. The ancestor suddenly let out a soft groan. His voice was not loud, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder that struck Ning Shuema's head. She had almost lost her mind, but she was instantly clear-headed. Her hand trembled as if she had been stung by a scorpion. She threw the branch that she had almost licked to the side. Strange. Why did she have the urge to suck the blood on it? She wasn't a vampire. What the hell was this? Ning Xuema hurriedly looked at the ancestor again. She saw that he was still lying there and the wound on his back was still bleeding. Damn it. She had just used her fingers to stop his bleeding, and then was attracted by the strange blood on the branch. She hadn't treated his wound yet. She couldn't help but look at the wound again. There was nothing unusual about the wound, and the blood flowing out was a normal bright red. It wasn't purple or fluorescent. Chapter 760. A thought suddenly floated into Xuema's mind. Could it be that the bright purple blood was the color of the ancestor's heart? That's impossible, right? Shouldn't the color of blood be the same? How could only the blood of the heart be special? As she pondered, she quickly tended to his wound. She had done everything she could. Now she just had to wait for him to wake up and see if he had any medicine on him. Ning Xuema tidied up the miscellaneous items, cleaned the 2 knives and put them aside. She then looked at the ancestor. The ancestor was lying on his side with his eyes slightly closed. There was a faint white mist surrounding his body on the cloud bed, as if it was revolving around him and healing his wounds. That cloud bed seemed to be his personal item. Ning Xuema still couldn't touch it. When she touched it with her hand, she felt that it was cold to the bone. He was lying on it, but he didn't seem to be cold at all. Ning Xuema sat next to him and observed for a while. Seeing that he didn't move and his complexion didn't change, she felt relieved. It was only at this moment that she was in the mood to walk around this fairy tale-like castle. At first glance, it looked like there was only one hall in this place, but after careful observation, Ning Xuema found 2 small doors. These 2 small doors blended in with the surrounding light blue walls. She couldn't even see a crack. If she didn't know about mechanisms, she wouldn't have been able to find them. Of these 2 small halls, one was a storage room. The 2 knives were found here. The other room was completely empty. Only the ancestor could come to this place. It should be a place where he cultivated, right? She didn't expect that such a cold person would have such a fairy tale-like house. Could it be that such a lofty person also subconsciously longed for childlike fun? She walked around the hall again and sat down on a chair that looked like a white cloud. She looked up at the ceiling of the hall and watched the clouds pass by. She couldn't help but sigh. This place was really romantic. If you brought your loved one here for a vacation, you could see the blue sky and white clouds during the day and the vast galaxy at night. That would really be the life of an immortal. She couldn't help but look at the big bed again. It was such a big bed. If only she could lie down on it. Lying on the cloud bed and looking at the scenery above would be even more beautiful. If she could lie down on it with her lover, nesting in her lover's arms, it would be even better. What a pity. She couldn't go up. She touched her nose and looked at the D-Zune above her. Forget it. Even if she could go up, she couldn't lie down with the ancestor. She was also a little tired, but in order to take care of the seriously injured D-Zune, she didn't dare to rest. She stayed in the hall and looked at the scenery in the sky for a while, then came out to see if Kirin had returned. She walked out of the Castle of Dreams and looked at the jellyfish path that led outside. The jellyfish gathered and scattered in the water, changing their patterns from time to time. It was quite interesting. She first used telepathy to contact Kirin. The little guy was in the middle of a killing spree. It coolly responded to her, indicating that it was fine, and then focused on killing the wolves. Ning Xuema sat on the steps and looked at the jellyfish for a while. With her current kung fu, she should have no problem walking on water. Should she give it a try? She slowly approached the edge of the water and took a deep breath. Just as she was about to step out, she suddenly thought of something and shrank back. With the ability of a venerable sovereign, he had to step on these jellyfish every time he came here. If the water here was not strange, he would not have to go through so much trouble, right? Chapter 761. She looked at the water, but she couldn't see anything on the surface. The water was as clear as crystal, and she could see the colorful pebbles at the bottom. There wasn't a single fish swimming in them. Her heart sank. Although it was said that there would be no fish if the water was too clear, it was impossible for there to be no fish in such a big lake. It seemed that there was indeed something wrong with the water. She thought for a moment, then tore off a piece of light gauze from her body and threw it into the water. This kind of gauze should have floated on the surface of the water, but after this piece of gauze fell, it flew into the water like an iron ball. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared as if it had melted into the water. Ning Xuema broke out in cold sweat. Fortunately, she didn't test it blindly. Otherwise, she would have been melted by the water like this piece of gauze. It seemed that only these jellyfish could swim in this kind of water, and the water quality here should be different from the place where the lotus grew. She touched her stomach. After being busy for so long, she was a little hungry. It seemed that she could only wait for the ancestor to wake up and take her away from here to eat. Speaking of which, with the ancestor's ability, shouldn't he be able to abstain from eating? What were those two sabers for? Could it be that the ancestor had to cook when he was meditating here? Thinking about how such a lofty ancestor could actually cook for himself, Ning Xuema felt that this scene was too beautiful. She couldn't imagine it. She sighed, threw away these messy questions and returned to the palace. First, she went to check on the ancestor's injuries. After all, she didn't use any medicine. The ancestor's face was still very pale, and there was no sign of him waking up. She touched his forehead and found that he didn't have a fever. After thinking for a moment, she pulled over a white cloud-like praying mat and sat down near the bed. She looked at his handsome face and was lost in thought for a moment. Now that the surroundings were quiet, she finally had the time to organize her chaotic thoughts. In fact, when Han Shangyue took her as a concubine, she already suspected that Han Shangyue was the ancestor, but she didn't have any conclusive evidence. In addition, her identity as a concubine made her feel repulsed, so she didn't want to ask about his background. Wasn't it a deal with him? When the time came, the two sides would go their separate ways. The bridge would go its own way and the road would go its own way. It was because of this idea that Ning Xuema had never thought of giving her heart to this person. She even thought that she liked cold and muscular men, and not a cold and handsome man like Han Shangyue. What's more, it was obvious that this person had an extremely deep background. His temperament was also profound, and he did not express his emotions in words. It was the most difficult to fathom the thoughts of people like him, and it was difficult to fathom. Therefore, Ning Xuemo rejected him from the bottom of her heart due to all these factors. Later on, as they interacted again and again, she began to subconsciously treat him as a protective umbrella. Unknowingly, he had also walked into her heart. When you don't care about someone, they can't hurt you no matter what they do. But when you start to care about someone, you will care about everything that you didn't care about before. For example, his real name, his real identity, and the fact that he only wanted her to be a concubine. If she didn't have feelings for him, she wouldn't care about these things. But when he lifted the carriage like a knight and saved her from Shui Ilan, Xuema lay in his arms and felt comforted and at ease. Chapter 762. From then on, she had already begun to have feelings for him. It was just that she didn't realize it herself. On Rongyu's carefree island, Han Shangyue had used that method to restore her appearance. He had even forcefully kissed her and said, "Xuema, you like me?" At that time, her heart had been beating like thunder. Although she denied it because she wasn't sure, she had started to feel nervous. She had a vague feeling that she had really fallen for him. She had fallen into his domineering gentleness. She knew that Han Shangyue liked her. But how much did he like her? Was it love? She couldn't be sure. After all, she was still a concubine. After all, he still hadn't told her his identity and name. If a person's identity and name were fake, how could she dare to entrust all her feelings to him? So Xuema had probed him with her words, intentionally or unintentionally stabbing him. In the end, he had run away after a few words and disappeared without a trace. He had left her alone on Rongyu Tianlan's island and left her to fend for herself. This had left Xuema speechless. Although she hadn't shown anything at that time, there had been a knot in her heart. After that, her soul had automatically floated out and was almost destroyed by Yi Qingluan. When she had woken up, she had been on Buddha Lotus Mountain. Needless to say, he had saved her. She didn't even know how he had saved her. After waking up this time, she had felt like she had lost something, but she couldn't tell what it was. Moreover, her feelings towards Han Shangyue were a bit strange. It was as if she had rejected him from the depths of her heart, but she couldn't tell why. Moreover, when they had met, he had used his identity as the Prime Emperor to meet her. He hadn't mentioned Han Shangyue at all. She didn't know what he was planning, and subconsciously she didn't want to recognize him. So she had simply treated him as the Prime Emperor she had met for the second time. She had also treated him with the proper etiquette. As an agent, acting was her forte. She hadn't seen anything unusual in her actions. But she hadn't thought that he would still use his identity as the Prime Emperor and do things that Han Shangyue would do to her. This had made her a bit flustered, and the inexplicable disgust had also increased. That was why she had done all these things. She had originally thought that he would use his D-Zun identity to deal with her. However, she did not expect him to reveal Han Shanyue's identity at this moment. She could no longer pretend to be a fool. The injuries on his body could be more or less diagnosed without looking at his face. In other words, the mask did not have to be removed. The moment he removed it, it was undoubtedly a clear indication of his identity to Ning Xuema. What was his purpose in doing this? Is it because he really likes me? So he had a showdown with her? Ning Xuema's heart skipped a few beats. Could it be this possibility? Is that so? Is that so? Is that so? What if it is? If that was the case, what should she do? How should he respond to him? Being liked by such a great god was both a good thing and a bad thing. If she also loved him very much now and both of them were in love with each other, she could just accept it and fly away together. But now, even she couldn't tell if she liked him or not. She seemed to like him very much, but she also felt an inexplicable repulsion. She wanted to reject, but would the great deity allow her to do so? She hugged her knees as she sat on the futon. For a moment, she was lost in thought. After thinking for a while, she raised her hand and knocked on her head. Chapter 763. No wonder the novel said that once the relationship between a man and a woman was involved, it would be like a cat scratching a strand of wool, unable to be pulled out. Now it seemed that it was true. If an ordinary man had confessed to her, she would have rejected him directly if she didn't like him. She would have given the other party a quick death as well as herself a quick death. But the other party was the ancestor. If she rejected him directly and knew his biggest secret, would he kill her in a fit of anger? Damn it. My head hurts. Ning Xuema shook her head and simply didn't think about it. Her cultivation was more important. Only when she truly became strong would she have the confidence to live in this world. She still had to take revenge on that Yi Qingwan. She checked the ancestor's injuries again. There was no change. It was neither good nor bad. Looking at his condition, Xuema was somewhat anxious, but there was nothing she could do. She once again used the rejuvenation technique on him, but there was little effect. His eyes were still closed and he wouldn't wake up. But his breathing seemed to be a bit better than before. The ancestor actually suffered such a serious injury, which was really out of Ning Xuema's expectations. She still had the illusion that she was dreaming. Ning Xuema had recently become accustomed to diligently cultivating. At this time sitting here she couldn't help but think of the techniques she saw in the White Tower, so she simply cultivated here. The spiritual energy here seemed to be particularly abundant, and the most abundant was the water element, which was just right for her to cultivate the wood element techniques. Time always passed very quickly while cultivating. Ning Xuema didn't know how much time had passed. She was completely immersed in her cultivation when she suddenly heard a weak groan. The sound was low and hoarse, but it was like a heavy hammer falling on her heart, causing her to instantly return to her senses. She subconsciously looked back and was shocked. The ancestor was still lying there, his brows tightly knitted, and his originally pale face was red as if he had put on rouge. His breathing was also somewhat hurried. He had a fever? Ning Xuema hurriedly touched his head. Her heart thumped. His forehead was burning. He really had a high fever. Needless to say, it was because the injury on his back was too serious, and he hadn't been treated with any medicine, so he had a fever. Ning Xuema began to work like a spinning top. She tore off a piece of cloth and dipped it in water to do physical cooling for him. The worst part was that his fever was different from a normal person's. A normal person's fever of 42 degrees Celsius was the limit. According to Ning Xuema's measurements, his body temperature was estimated to be around 48 degrees Celsius. As soon as she wiped it with a wet cloth, the moisture was immediately dried by his high temperature. At first, Ning Xuema only wiped his forehead. Later, when she saw that his fever was too high, she simply wiped his entire body. Of course, this whole body only included his upper body and below his thighs. She still didn't dare to touch the part between his thighs. Strangely enough, Ning Xuema had seen at least 70 to 80 men's bodies in her life. She had seen quite a few men stripped naked for surgery, but she had never felt anything strange about it. At that time she was just a doctor. Looking at those people's bodies was like looking at meat on a chopping board. But now she was just wiping him like this and she hadn't even wiped the important parts yet, but her heart was actually beating faster. The high fever from his body seemed to be transmitted to her, and she couldn't help but blush. When she wiped his chest, Shuama's fingers were slightly trembling. She had seen him in the past and he had always been high and mighty. His clothes were tightly buttoned and he was the standard male god of abstinence. Chapter 764. But now his clothes were half off and he was lying there, allowing her to do whatever she wanted. His face was usually pale and there was almost no expression on his face. When he looked down at people, there was a sense of condescension making people not dare to get close to him. But now he was lying in front of her. His cheeks were light pink because of the high temperature, and his long eyelashes covered his eyelids. Occasionally, his thin lips would open slightly, spitting out one or two vague notes. This posture, it was like a god in distress who had been pulled down from his throne and mistakenly entered the mortal world. It made Ning Shuema have an unprecedented strange feeling in her heart. She actually had an impulse to hug him. This feeling came so suddenly that it shocked her. She shook her head to shake off the messy thoughts in her mind and focused on wiping his body. When she was wiping his palms, he suddenly turned his hand and grabbed her wrist. He suddenly pulled her. Ning Shuema was naturally unprepared at this time, and he was strangely strong. She was actually pulled onto the bed by him. She fell into his arms. A familiar smell came to her face and enveloped her whole body. Ning Shuema cried out in a low voice. She subconsciously wanted to push him away, but her wrist was caught by him. Even if this person was unconscious, his technique was extremely accurate. He was holding her wrist. When her wrist was held, she could not use her strength. She pushed him, but he did not push her away. Instead, he hugged her even tighter. Ning Shuema was a little angry. She immediately wanted to kick him away, but his vague murmurs made her freeze. Momo? There was pain, helplessness, and even a trace of sadness in his voice. Ning Shuema felt as if she was struck by lightning. Her heart felt as if it was being ruthlessly grasped by someone. It made her nose ache inexplicably. In this way he was not as aloof as he usually was. He was inexplicably fragile like glass. He would never appear like this when he was awake, but it really touched Ning Shuema's heart. She could not bear to push him away again. Ever since she had known him, he had called her Shuema, called her little miss, little girl, and even called her by her full name. However, this was the first time he had called her Momo. His voice was filled with tenderness, pleading, and gentleness. Perhaps he felt Shuema loosen her grip, so he hugged her even tighter, as if he wanted to squeeze her into his bones. It was so tight that she could hardly breathe. Because of his high fever, his embrace was hot. Ning Shuema had the illusion that she was going to melt in his embrace. Momo? His lips were right beside her ear, almost sucking on her earlobe and igniting her soul. Don't be so ruthless. His hot breath made Shuema's body hot and cold. She could barely hear what he was saying. She only heard two words clearly. Momo, Momo. Was he calling her? Or was he calling a girl with the same name as her? The last guess made her feel a little uncomfortable. She was about to try to push him away again. However, he murmured again, Shuema? Just this one sentence made Ning Shuema feel as if her acupoints had been pressed. Her heart rose and fell like a tide. Oh, don't be afraid of me, Shuema, he murmured a few intermittent words. His eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and his thin lips were dry. He looked like a lost child. Chapter 765. Ning Shuema's heart felt as if it was being slowly squeezed by someone. Following his whispers, the squeezing became tighter and tighter. That pain was mixed with a kind of grievance and heartache, causing her eyes to redden. She shrank into his chest, her hands and feet aching. She couldn't struggle, or perhaps she didn't want to struggle. She simply allowed him to hold her tighter and tighter. Momo? He sighed and whispered, You clearly like me, you clearly, why do you do this? It was like he was in a nightmare. The pain in his voice became even heavier, as if he were confused, as if he didn't understand, as if he was filled with grief that couldn't be dissolved. Ning Shuema's body stiffened again. Being held in his fiery embrace, the high heat caused her mind to become a bit muddled. She could only faintly feel that something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. His lips suddenly fell, directly kissing Ning Shuema's lips. His lips were dry, and it hurt a bit as they rubbed against hers. But when that fiery breath rushed into her mouth, she was stunned. Her heart seemed as if it would jump out of her chest. This was the second time he had kissed her. The first time was on Carefree Island. His deep kiss had contained a probing meaning. At that time she still had the appearance of an old lady. This time she had finally restored her original appearance, but he had been in a semi-conscious state. His kiss was fiery and domineering, as if he wanted to sweep away everything in Shuema's mouth. He wanted to sweep away her soul and fuse it into his flesh and blood, so that they could never be separated from each other again. That kiss was like the end of the world. That kiss caused Ning Shuema to become dizzy. She was no longer able to resist him, nor was she able to think clearly. She didn't know when her arms had wrapped around his waist, but she could feel his warmth, feel his everything. His clothes were already half off. Ning Shuema was lying in his embrace, and she could clearly feel the fiery heat in his chest. That heat seemed to pass through her clothes and into her heart. Her heart was filled with both sweetness and sourness. Even she couldn't describe this feeling. She could feel that his body was getting hotter and hotter, and she could feel that something was pushing against her lower abdomen, causing her to feel pain. She felt his hands tugging at her clothes. She felt that he was no longer satisfied with just kissing her lips. His kisses gradually moved downwards, kissing her chin, neck, collarbone, shoulder. Inch by inch, inch by inch, inch by inch, lost in ecstasy, inch by inch, Ning Shuema was almost lost in the passion he gave her. She couldn't find her reason anymore. She just hugged him and felt him, scared out of her wits. She had even forgotten who she was. She had even forgotten to ask if the Momo he spoke of was the same person as her, until he suddenly flipped over and pressed her under his body. Her back was pressed against the cold cloud bed. That bone-chilling cold was like a venomous snake as it traveled from her back to her entire body and rushed into her brain. She shuddered violently. That bone-chilling coldness almost froze her, but at the same time, it also cleared her mind. Fortunately, his body was burning hot, and he had stuck close to her for a long time, so she didn't freeze the moment she touched the cloud bed. His hands and feet were still very nimble. Shuema secretly took a breath. She exerted strength in her arms and finally pushed him off her body. Then she suddenly flipped over and finally escaped from the cloud bed. Her movements were too hasty, and her heart was too flustered. She staggered and almost fell to the ground. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.